I want to begin with a story, maybe appropriate for our setting. And it's a story about Easter Island. So, of course, scholars are still trying to figure out why the society on Easter Island collapsed, putting an end to the people sort of famed for their construction of towering stone heads. And one very intriguing theory that archaeologists have is that it had to do with the heads themselves. So basically, somehow, people decided that the heads effectively symbolized power and success. And so different groups on the island began to compete with one another to build more and more stone heads than the other groups. There ended up being 900 of them, some of them 30 feet tall. The tower, what was that, 3 stories tall. It's almost unbelievable. But there was a problem, and that is that there was only one quarry on the island. And so in order to build this incredible amount of heads and move them to different parts of the periphery of the island, they had to figure out a way to cut down trees and use them as rollers to move the stones around the island. Okay, so as they engaged in their sort of mad head building projects, in only a few generations they managed to entirely deforest this once verdant island covered in tropical forests. And if you look at pictures of Easter Island today, it basically looks like scrubland. It looks like someone literally mowed the lawn around the island, right? What's interesting is that we assume that is sort of the natural state of the island, but in fact, it's the clue to the collapse itself, which is fascinating to me. So, and of course, it was strange because the people must have known, right, that things were not going well as they were eating through their own ecosystem. I mean, after a while, we know that they didn't have enough wood to live in their traditional houses anymore, so they had to live in caves. We know that their diet changed dramatically because they used to hunt and forage in the forest, and suddenly those species collapsed. We know that they were also farmers, but because of the massive deforestation and the collapse of floral ecosystems, springs on the island themselves began to dry up, and they could no longer irrigate their crops. And because there were not enough trees to go around, they also couldn't build their boats from which they used to fish. And so slowly they began to die of famine, effectively, and the population began to decline really dramatically. So, and to me, what's really powerful about this story is that it shows us collapse in rapid motion. That's all due to effectively a myth. Okay? But it was a myth that was so powerful that despite knowing its madness, the people couldn't resist it. Now, it might be easy for us to assume that this is maybe a characteristic of sort of small-scale societies, but in fact, that's not at all true. In our own globalized civilization, we too are subject to very powerful myths, and one of those myths is very similar to the myth that led to the demise of Easter Island. So, in the same way that Easter Island economics was organized around the principle of ever-increasing stone heads, okay? So too our society is organized around the principle of ever-increasing GDP growth. So now, basically, the principle is that GDP must grow and must grow at all costs. So think about it, right? So right now, GDP growth is the primary public policy objective of literally every government, almost every government, on the face of the planet. Think about that. And it's held by left and right alike. Okay, so the left and the right may bicker about how to distribute the yields of growth through better wages or public housing, whatever it might be. But on the question of growth itself, they are unanimously united. So think about the Labour Party up until now. A robust, at least ostensibly robust leftist party has historically been very pro-growth. And so on this issue, there's no daylight between them and the Tories. This is how hegemonic the idea of growth is in our society. So why must GDP grow? The assumption that we all have is that GDP growth is effectively equivalent to human progress. This is basically what we're told from virtually every media outlet that there is, in terms of World Bank reports, IMF reports, the world's nations ranked by GDP every year, every quarter even, and so on. The idea is that we need growth in order to do important things that we all love, like eradicate poverty and improve people's well-being, create jobs, and maybe even increase wages. We think that growth is essential to these things. So we take the assumption of necessary growth for granted. It seems to us to be normal and natural, and if you ever do stop and question it, then people look at you like you're completely mad. And if you don't believe me, literally try it and see what your reaction is. It's quite curious. It's one of those sort of deeply unquestioned assumptions about our world. So what is GDP? GDP is, in sort of very lay terms, it's the measure of all the stuff that we extract and produce and consume in our economy every year, the monetary measure of all that stuff. So another way to put it is that it measures the monetary value of all the resources that we dig up from the earth, right? And the human labor that we churn into money. So to the extent that we churn nature and humans into money, that is GDP growth, right? And what's important here is that the principle of growth is that every year we must extract and produce and consume more than we did the year before. It's a flow measure, it's not a stock measure. And so to grow the economy, we have to, next year, we've got to produce and consume as much as we are this year, plus in increments. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is a relatively recent invention, actually. It was actually, the idea of GDP was devised only recently by Simon Kuznets, an American economist, who was asked by Congress in the 1930s to figure out why the Great Depression was going on and how it could be fixed. So he came up with a measure that basically added up all of the value in the economy every year. So they could figure out where the problem was and what they could do to sort of sort it out. And of course, the American Congress adopted it. But in his speech to Congress, Kuznets himself gave a warning. And he said, whatever you do, never use GDP as a measure of normal human progress. It will be the end of you, is what he said. And the reason is because GDP is an odd measure, and he designed it so he should know. It's a measure that doesn't count social negatives or ecological negatives. So, for example, if you cut down a forest and sell the forest for timber, GDP goes up. But it doesn't account for the cost of losing that forest as a sink for carbon, or as a habitat for endangered species, or as a future asset. Right? And the same goes with, say, mountains. If you strip the mountains for coal, then GDP goes up. It doesn't count the cost of the emissions from the coal, et cetera, okay? So he warned against it. But then something happened, unfortunately, and that was that World War II became a thing, and there were Nazis all around. And the government of Britain wanted to figure out how they could defeat the Nazis at all costs. And so John Maynard Keynes, famous British economist, rocked up on stage and he said, well, we can use GDP as a way of figuring out all the resources we have available to fight and Cousins was like, wait, don't do this, it's going to be dangerous, for my warning. And he was like, no, we have to beat the Nazis at all costs. So even though GDP includes things that are bad, we need to know how much monetary power we have. So let's do that. And so it further entrenched the idea. And then, most importantly, during the Cold War, in the sort of epic battle between the West and the USSR, GDP, but not just GDP growth itself became an indicator for measuring which civilization was best. So kind of grand pissing match, if you will, between the big men in this sort of world stage. And ever since then, because of the way that globalization has worked, this measure has been spread around the world and now is the dominant feature of literally every economic system on the planet in a formal sense. Okay? And it's no wonder that it's so violent. If you think about it, GDP was devised as a wartime measure, right? The idea was a violent intention in the first place, and so it's not surprising that it doesn't pay attention to the consequences of violence. Now let's think about what growth means. Okay? I said that you have to have an increment every year to keep the economy afloat. Economists say we need about 3% per year. So 3% maybe sounds sort of small to us, actually. And it sounds normal for sure. I mean, we hear this from our politicians almost every time they open their mouths. This is the kind of growth that we need. It's enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals, bizarrely. Okay. It seems easy, it seems fine, because we're used to thinking in a linear scale. But growth is an exponential curve. It's a compound function. So 3% growth means doubling a thing every 20 years. So think about that. If you take the global economy in the year 2000, which was not a time of poverty, let's say, right? I mean, right? This is a time of already rampant consumerism in the West. And then imagine doubling that global economy by the year 2020. And then doubling it again from its already doubled state by the year 2040. And then doubling it again and so on and so forth, right? Until the end of the century, when the global economy is 32 times larger than it is at the beginning of the century. That is the trajectory that not only we are presently on, but trying to advance, right? This is our objective, which is almost, it boggles the mind, actually. If ancient Egypt, at the beginning of their civilization, the 3,000-year civilization, had 1 cubic meter of stuff, and grew that amount of stuff by a modest 3% every year. By the end of their civilization, they would have enough stuff to fill 1 billion solar systems, which is in fact not a joke. This gives you a sense of sort of the absurd scale effect of growth. Okay? Now, here's the thing: is that as GDP rises on an exponential curve, then ecological impact rises right along with it. And for some of you, this may seem like common sense. Okay, but I'm going to give you a measure, and it's a measure that we in ecological economics call material footprint. And basically, it's a single measure that measures all of the material stuff that we extract and consume from the earth every year. Okay? So everything from petroleum to plastic, from biomass and forests to fish, gold and silver and stone, everything that we consume. If you add all of that stuff up, then right now we're consuming 80 billion tons of stuff per year. Okay? For perspective, the sustainable level of material consumption, they say, ecologists say, is about 50 billion tons of stuff per year. We passed that in the year 2000, and we're now overshooting that boundary by 60% per year. Okay. According to the models that we have right now, with business as usual, on our present trajectory, we're going to hit 180 billion tons of stuff per year, more than double what we're presently consuming, and 3 times more than the planetary boundary on this. Okay, and again, this is the objective. This is where we're headed. So we're living in an age of what we call ecological overshoot. Okay, and if you're not familiar with that term, the best way to understand it is that it means that we're extracting and wasting more than the earth can regenerate or absorb. Okay? So if we were extracting only as much as the earth could regenerate, because the earth is a regenerative place, and if we were wasting and emitting carbon only to the extent that the atmosphere could reabsorb it safely and our oceans could reabsorb it safely, we would be at what we call a steady state economy. Okay? But instead of being at a steady state, we're in a phase of ecological overshoot. And we can see the consequences all around us. And I'm sure that if you read the news, you're familiar with them. Okay? We know that since 1950, half of the world's tropical forests have disappeared. And believe it or not, on our present trajectory, they will be gone by the year 2050, which is incredibly soon. Our grandchildren may not see a mature tropical forest. Fish stocks are collapsing really rapidly. Many of our key fish stocks are down to 1% of their former volume from earlier in the 20th century. Insect populations are collapsing. This is a huge story right now with key insect populations across Western Europe down by 75% over only 25 years, due largely to the chemicals that we use in industrial agriculture. The broad biodiversity extinction rate right now, species are going extinct at more than 1,000 times faster than the background rate before the Industrial Revolution, which some ecologists think is actually more serious than climate change in terms of an existential threat to our civilization. And then, of course, there's climate change itself, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. Right now, even with the Paris Agreement in place and the nationally determined contributions that nations have promised, we're headed on a trajectory of 3 degrees warming by the end of the century, which may not sound like very much. And of course, this will mean rising seas. But more importantly, the bigger issue for us is the prospect of famine. Because as the planet warms, then agricultural yields begin to decline. And if we're trying to feed a growing human population with declining agricultural yields, this is going to result in, even according to the most conservative estimates by organizations like the World Bank, mass famine in this century, which will drive only further human displacement and wipe out any gains, crucially, that we hope to make against poverty through the dominance paradigm of growth. Now, what's important about this is that, in terms of responsibility for this crisis, the hard truth is that virtually all of it is due to overconsumption in a handful of rich nations, like the UK, the US, nations of Western Europe, Australia, and so on. Okay. Right now, in the average high-income nation, the average person consumes 28 material tons of stuff per year. Okay, on average. In low-income nations of the world, the average is about 2 tons of stuff per year. So in rich nations, people consume about 14 times more material stuff in that broad category that I discussed before than people do in low-income nations. if we were to all consume at the level of the average person in the rest of the world, including middle-income nations, then we'd be consuming 7 tons of stuff per year, which is exactly at the planetary boundary. So if we were consuming like everyone else in the rest of the world, there would be no ecological overshoot. In terms of emissions, maybe, but in terms of other kinds of ecological overshoot, no. So this again emphasizes the fact that this is down to overconsumption in a few rich nations who have been on a growth trajectory for a very long time and very aggressively. So if the entire world were to consume as we do in high-income nations, we would need 3.8 Earths to sustain our consumption. Which is interesting because the plan right now is that everyone should be like the West. Everyone should be like high-income nations. This is the development objective. And of course, we don't have the Earths necessary for this, unless of course Elon Musk manages to colonize Mars and somehow turn it into an Earth, and then do that 3 or 4 times more. And of course, what's important about this also is that this overconsumption has a disproportionate impact on the global South. So here's one example. The global South suffers losses due to climate change in the region of $600 billion per year, which outstrips the aid budget by a factor of 5. So for every dollar of aid that the North gives to the South, they lose 5 times more than that, simply in costs associated with climate change, due to historical emissions, almost entirely by rich nations. And this is sort of the depth of climate injustice. Each year, about 400,000 people die due to climate change-related causes. 98% of those people die in the global south every year. And the vast majority of them are from countries that have contributed the very least to historical emissions of anyone on Earth. So the conclusion here is that rich nations need to make dramatic reductions in their consumption. Okay? In the region of 75% reductions in material consumption each year, and emissions reductions of 12% per year starting in 2020. This is our only roadmap to sort of living within planetary boundaries. But here's the question. Is it possible to achieve these kinds of reductions in the context of a growing economy? This is literally the $1 million billion question, right? Because remember, our objective is growth. And so can our objective also be this massive reduction in consumption, right? Now, in 2012, a number of key reports came out saying, don't worry, everybody. All we need is green growth, right? So we can figure out ways to use public policy and technological innovation to decouple material consumption and ecological degradation from growth. So we keep growing our incomes indefinitely, while at the same time reducing our material consumption and emissions back down to planetary boundaries. This was their promise to us. 2012, not long ago. Of course, at the time, there was no data that this was in fact possible. But since then, fortunately, we do have data. A number of very high-profile models that have been released that explore precisely this question. And the news, time after time after time, is bad. In fact, literally every scientific study that's been published on this concludes the same thing, and that is that absolute decoupling of resource use from GDP is impossible. Including the UN, only a couple of months ago, that came to this very strong conclusion that green growth is not a thing. So, of course, we're going to need all the technology, all the best public policy we can get, but also it's not going to be enough. If growth is incompatible with planetary boundaries, and if then the conclusion, of course, is that some kind of degrowth is necessary, some kind of reduction in our economic activity, right? And this is a difficult pill to swallow, and almost nobody is talking about this fact that we need to sort of plan a scale down of our aggregate economic activity in order to maintain the basis for our own civilization, right? Now, here's the thing: is that crucially, whenever I say this, someone's always going out there saying, "You're talking about voluntary poverty, hair shirts, misery, hunger, what, no one's going to buy into this agenda." But here's the thing: degrowth does not mean immiseration. Okay, and we know that for these reasons. In the 1970s, the United States of America had a lower poverty rate and higher real wages than it does today, despite a GDP per capita half of what it is presently. Right? They were half as rich in aggregate, and yet they were doing better in key human indicators. Can anyone guess why that was?
Maximum community.
What's that?
Maximum
Okay, yeah, definitely. Distribution, exactly. It was a more equally, a more equitable distribution of the yields of the economy already, right? Here's another example. Europe, right, has 40% less GDP per capita than the US. And yet they beat the US on virtually every measure of what counts. Education, healthcare, life expectancy, happiness, right? Espresso, plazas, etc., right? Costa Rica. Costa Rica has better life expectancy than the US and higher happiness levels than the US, rivaling even Scandinavian nations, right? With 1/5 of the GDP per capita, right? Because they've invested heavily in universal healthcare and education. It's easy to generate high levels of human happiness and well-being without any growth at all, simply by redistributing more fairly what we already have. So this is crucial because growth, in fact, this idea that growth is necessary for us to live good lives is in fact a lie. We know from data after data after data that that's not true. So the question is, how do we get there? How do we manage a kind of economy where we're scaling down our economic activity and at the same time maintaining and even enhancing human flourishing? Okay. So I'm going to appeal to your intellect and offer you a couple of ideas that we discuss in sort of ecological economic circles. Now remember, the goal here is not simply to get individuals to reduce their material consumption. As noble as that is, it's a dead end. And the reason is because we all live in a society, in an economy that is structurally dependent on growth. If it does not grow, it collapses. And if it collapses, then people get hurt and they die, right? People lose their jobs, they can't pay for food on the table, they end up homeless, etc. Nobody wants this. So we need to liberate ourselves somehow, not just from our own individual consumption, but from the tyranny of growth that lies at the heart of our economy. How do we get there? We have to think first, intellectually, about why our economy has to grow in the first place. Once we understand why it must grow, we can think about how to change those features of it. So here's one idea. What if we got rid of GDP as an objective, as a public policy objective? Remember, I told you about the problems with it. There are alternative measures out there. One is called the genuine progress indicator, which starts with GDP and then subtracts social and ecological negatives. Okay. So when politicians are pursuing GPI, for example, then they're incentivized to maximize social goods while minimizing ecological bads. Okay. So when you change the thing that we're chasing, you change the behavior of our politicians. A second idea is to do something about the shareholder value rules that corporations operate under. Okay? So if you take your average local pub, what is their objective? Their objective is to make enough money every year, probably the same amount of money each year, so they can pay their rents, pay their workers, and buy some food for their family. And that is their objective. Not to take over every pub in the world, but literally that is the objective. This idea of endless growth of every listed company on the stock market. And the reason is because they have a fiduciary duty to, by law, to maximize shareholder returns, regardless of the ecological and social cost. But it's very simple to change these laws. A few sentences would do the trick. And so we have people working on this already, and we should get involved in that. We've already discussed the importance of a fair distribution of the yields of our economy. And the reason this is important is because politicians tell us that we need growth to improve people's lives, and they literally often say themselves that growth is a substitute for equality. Okay, you will literally hear politicians saying this, and economists, because it's easier for them to grow the pie and hope that some trickles down than to redistribute what we already have more fairly. But we can take their little maxim and turn it around. If growth is a substitute for equality, then equality can be a substitute for growth, and we need to insist on that. It used to be that demanding greater equality was kind of this radical left-wing agenda. But in fact, today, it's necessary for our survival on this planet. Right? This is no longer about ideology. So in a way, we're all revolutionaries now. We have to. Here's another idea. Decommoditizing basic social goods. Take the US, for example. In America, people spend immense amounts of their money on private health care, because there's no NHS, and on private education, because I'm here too, there's enormous fees for higher education. If those goods were decommoditized, then they would be able to spend a lot less money for the exact same quality of life, allowing them to work less, earn less, and consume less without any losses to their well-being. Or take London. If the housing stock in London was even half decommoditized, if our rent was half as much, we could work half as much, roughly, and earn half as much, and yet have no loss to the quality of life. Think about that. Right? This is the kind of thing we need to be thinking about as we move towards a kind of post-growth economy. I'm going to give you another idea, and that is a shorter working week. This is important because of what we call the productivity trap. Inbuilt in capitalism, the imperative for corporations to always increase labor productivity. As they do so, then they need fewer workers, and so it increases unemployment. And so politicians have to generate more growth to create more jobs to reabsorb those unemployed people. If you get a shorter working week and something like a job guarantee, we could redistribute necessary labor so all of us have access to the incomes we need to survive without having to generate more growth to create more jobs and reabsorb unemployed people. Working less is crucial to saving the planet. Bizarrely, tell your boss that. But here's the last idea I have for you. I'm sure that Helena will talk more about this. And that is that one of the reasons our economy has to grow is because of debt. Our economy is shot through with debt. And because debt comes with interest, the interest is a compound function. All of us have to work and produce more and more every year simply to pay back our debts, and so that we can keep sort of stability. Okay. So if we had something like citizens' debt audits, deciding which debts don't need to be repaid anymore because people are rich enough already, which has been done in some cities, in some localities, then we could rid a lot of the debt out of our economy. But it wouldn't actually be enough because our currency itself is based on debt. And this is the crucial thing that most people don't understand. When you go to a bank and take out a loan, you think that the bank is giving you money from its vault, its reserves, but in fact it's not. When you get a loan, a bank gives you a loan and it invents that money out of thin air, literally out of thin air. And so as it creates money, as it gives you a loan, it creates new money, and that money is intrinsically debt. Right? 97% of the money floating around in our economy right now is debt in this manner. Okay? So, which is one reason why we have this structural addiction to growth. So, with alternative currency systems that are debt-free, public money or positive money, it will remove, we hope, some of this sort of growth imperative from our economy. I'm going to stop, but I want to say I want to say one last thing, and that is that I really think that we have to be careful to not fool ourselves. It's easy for us to talk about moving towards a post-growth economy without confronting the obvious elephant in the room, and that is that this kind of economy that I'm discussing and that Helen will talk about is fundamentally incompatible with capitalism.
Add stream.
And that's
add to stream. Welcome to Subversive History, an anti-colonial and anti-capitalist Twitch stream, where we're going to be going over The Divide by Jason Hickel.
Don't say it. Don't accidentally say Jackson Hickel.
Not Jackson Hickel. Not Jackson Hickel. I know that this keeps happening. So there's like a couple. There's a lot. Today was going to be a big day regardless. Because thank you so much. Thank you all everybody that helped us get to affiliate. Thank you, Dan Simpson. Thank you, Robert Rousseau. Thank you, Famous Horse. Thank you, Matt from Unelectable Airwaves. Thank you, everybody that gave us a shout out and has helped us grow in a following. And thank you, chatters. Thank you, chat. Thank you, fellow subversives, for following us and giving us the time of day to do this cool interactive book club stream thing that I hope grows into something even more.
This is somewhat of like a
the day was ruined though, pretty much from this morning. So I have a number of close friends, some of the closest friends I've ever had in my life, in Colorado, specifically in the Springs. I was just there not too long ago, and this morning on the news, there apparently was a shooting where 5 people were murdered and 20 injured, and like, I'm 33 years old. We were just talking about before starting the stream how, like, what age we were when, like, Columbine happened, and our producer is young enough that they've never known an education system without the threat of mass shootings, and these things have just very quickly become commonplace where it's hard to even keep up. And especially with this one, right? Especially with the targeted attacks and the targeted hostility of the LGBTQIA plus community, of which I'm a part of. Me and my spouse are bisexual. It's scary, and I know that, like, I recognize that, like, from a place of privilege, that, like, me and my wife's marriage looks heteronormative to most people, but it hurts to be that afraid that, like, some Christo-fascist person radicalized by right-wing extremism flavored by American exceptionalism and this weird cis hetero patriarchal fucked up thing that is literally, like, on the same level as, like, phrenology, this weird thing that's, like, a holdover from, like, the age of colonialism, right? Is the reason why innocent people are being murdered, why people are having, like, their kids taken away from them, why people have to worry about, like, if their identity is going to be, like, medically co-signed, and all of this other, like, horrible shit. And the only solution that, like, I keep on seeing on the TV, right, is that we need to restrict access to firearms in a country where there's more firearms than people, right? We need to support our police that are we don't even monitor to what level of infiltration there is by these right-wing groups into law enforcement, let alone our military. And, like, that's our method of handling this. That's our solution, right? That the things rooted in slave catching and private army for oil barons and rich millionaires. That's our solution, or that, like, we're just gonna make the hoops that someone has to jump through in order to have a firearm for those that feel comfortable with and feel responsible enough to, like, become a firearm owner. It's very anxiety inducing, and I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way. We're not really a Twitch streams that, like, specializes in covering current events and stuff. It's just it was very anxious for me this morning, to not know if, like, one of my friends or someone close to them was affected by the event this morning. And I think that, like, if we're ever going to reach any kind of point where something can be done about these events that continue to transpire, these tragedies that continue to transpire, hello Dorian, it's going to require examining things from the root cause. And that root cause, right, is right-wing extremism. That root cause is fascism that was born here and thrives here. It didn't start in Italy. It didn't start in Germany. It was born here, right? And it's alive and well here. And that's really all I wanted to get at, and for everybody out there, please Stay safe, stay strong, you know, lal salam. And let's get on with the show.
Yeah, and I'm not a member of the
Oh,
particular
shit.
community being discussed, but other members of this stream are, and I completely support their time to discuss this, how they see fit, and offer them my support and condemnation of the event. So sorry to kind of, well, not sorry. We're not sorry to start on a little bit of a low note, but it's necessary to have these things discussed. And we don't usually talk about the brightest topics on this. Unfortunately, the annals of history are replete with disgusting and repulsive acts of violence and inhumanity. But typically, when we're covering those, maybe there's a little bit of a air of humor that we might play over those sometimes, as we might not be as directly affected, or we might not be the wounds might not be so fresh, but obviously we are offering our or at least I'm offering my most solemn condolences to this situation, as we're still dealing with the repercussions. So appreciate all the support. And obviously, this does hamper what was otherwise going to be an extremely celebratory stream, because after our initial first 4 streams that we had undergone, we had already achieved affiliate status a couple days ago. So this is our first stream as I guess official Twitch affiliates. I'm just now learning what that means, but from what I understand, this is a good thing, and this is a good step forward. So I'm very pleased with the support that we've received thus far. That is to some degree validating. Not that we require validation, but it is nice to know that there is some individuals out there that are interested in what we're talking about. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to hop in really quick while we're dealing with housekeeping, just to say from my end, congratulations. Thank you to all of the viewers and the followers and all that sort of stuff.
Regularly scheduled broadcast.
Say again? What did you say? Oh.
I'm sorry, what was it?
Can you guys still hear me?
I can hear you now. I'm sorry. I had my thing muted. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to go ahead and just put it out to the viewers we've got in the chat right now, that as part of being affiliates now on Twitch, we have the ability to display ads for you all. We are having a little bit of a dilemma about how we kind of want to handle these ads. As far as I can tell, there's no option to not have ads at all, which would obviously be our ideal, because we don't necessarily want to show things that we don't support. However, there is an option on Twitch where basically we could show y'all, do a little ad break either towards the beginning of the stream or towards the middle of the stream, which means that for a certain amount of time, you guys in the chat wouldn't have to watch ads at all, or new people coming in wouldn't have to view ads either. It would basically be, we pick when we want to see the ads, so that way you're not ads are not forced on you unnecessarily. So I'm going to put a little poll up that's going to kind of be running while the fellas here are chatting with you all about our topic for today, and you guys can kind of decide on like what you guys think would be best, if you want us to show you ads or if you'd rather just see them whenever they happen, just to kind of decide what the community would like to see, how you would think we should handle that. And but otherwise, I'm going to let you guys get started.
Thank you, Lily. Yeah, and when this first happened, our first decision was just no ads whatsoever. We're not going to run ads, but apparently you can't do that. If there is a way to do that that we may be overlooked, let us know, and we will absolutely remove that. Okay. Yeah, we had no real intention to like monetize ads or anything like that. But apparently there's like one of 2 ways. Lily's going to put together a poll, whichever one you think is like the least intrusive and the least obstructive or whatever. We'll do whatever you think is the best, because personally we wouldn't run them at all if it was up to us. So now that we got all that, what was that?
I said, look at that. Look at us, otherwise, lambasted tankies democratizing a fucking Twitch stream of all things.
Yeah. So today we are diving further into I wouldn't even say it's in depth. It's kind of casual, casual analysis of The Divide by Jason Hickel. And the more I read this book once before, and that's why I so strongly recommended it for us to go over it on the stream. And going through it the second time, we're about halfway through it now, has just really reminded me why this book was so influential to me the first time that I read it. Because Hickel, as an anthropologist, and I guess like an economically based anthropologist, has just an incredibly uncanny ability to synthesize these like immensely significant historical and economic topics and distill them into easily digestible paragraphs and chapters that just like tell the story of the world, the modern world as we know it, how the first world developed, how the third world developed, what is the mechanisms that have created poverty, how poverty has been created and maintained by man-made sources, and what we should be doing about it in a way with full evidence and sources and historical relevancy. So, Johnny, how do you feel? I mean, I know this is your first time going through the book. How are you feeling now as we're hitting the halfway point?
Sorry, I had a sneeze duck.
Look into the light.
What I think, I honestly think,
just your general vibe.
I'm sure I've said this before, but I think that like between and I only just started one of the 3 books that I'm gonna say, but I think like 3 foundational, like, because I know a lot of people, they have like a lot of like what's the word, like hesitance towards reading something as dated as like Lenin or Marx, or any of that other stuff, right? And I know that we try and keep things like tied to like how this is contemporary a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
And especially this book, it does an amazing job of keeping things contemporary, right? So I would say this book, Sylvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch, and Glenn Coulthard's Redskin White Masks, I think are like 3 books that like I would recommend to anybody who's just like, I have no idea about fucking any of this, right? But this book is like literally, I was just telling Pat before and he agreed with me, it's difficult to try and summarize any of this book without just like highlighting an entire page, highlighting an entire paragraph. From one paragraph to the next is just like the most illuminating, concise, informational, like, it's not in like any kind of like academic jargon or any of that. It's all in simplistic terms. You don't need any kind of like primer in maths to get at like the economic issues at hand.
Let me say, I've read Samir Amin. I've read 2 of his books, and his books are tough. No, like way more difficult to read and way more difficult to get through than a book like this. Like for somebody that's kind of like has like looking for like a 101 of like economics from a leftist perspective, I would recommend this. I would recommend Yanis Varoufakis, Talking to My Daughter About the Economy. And I would probably recommend Ha-Jun Chang, who wrote 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, or I don't know if anybody's noticed, but he actually has an endorsement here, that same South Korean economist. This book will radically change the way in which you understand the workings of the global economic system. So those 3 are like my 3. If somebody was like, how does the economy work? Well, those would be the 3 books that I would hand them. First off, you know what I mean? Then you can probably look into like the David Harvey and
Steve Keen, stuff like that.
Familiar with that one, but yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of like a little bit more of like a broader discussion of the book that we're reading for anyone that's just tuning in and maybe hasn't been there. We'll go through like a little bit of a recap of kind of what the content that we've covered from the book so far. So in the first stream, we kind of went over a couple things such as like the author's origin story, which adds a little bit of novelty to the book in terms of like the lens that which you're consuming it through. Then you kind of go into the first portion of the book, what goes into like why our country's poor, what is poverty, how does poverty develop. Then we kind of went into like a pretty intense analysis of the way in which colonialism, from the time of Columbus to the end of slavery era, and the way that all of these compounding factors of colonialism, underdevelopment, slavery, the economic benefits that were afforded to the imperialist core, not only just in the monetary, but also in certain ways that, like, things like the ghost acres, what they're limited to in their land mass, they're now able to export to places like the New World, which gives like a small backwater like England immense, global power, because it's able to export essentially all this agricultural land that it doesn't actually possess in its own nation out to like another land mass, and then reap all the benefits of it through colonization and through slavery. So that kind of brings us up to the turn of the 20th century. And where this chapter really begins is the end of World War I, the Roaring Twenties, how the Roaring Twenties led to the Great Depression, and then kind of how that leads to FDR and the New Deal, that era, Keynesianism, and then into what is referred to in the book as the Age of the Coup, which is a topic that we are frequently discussing on this stream here. The United States, the CIA, the things they do around the world, the very real, not like conspiracy, half-baked conspiracy theories, the very real and documented atrocities that have been carried out throughout the third world by the CIA to aid U.S. corporate interests and geopolitical agenda. So that's what you're going to get a lot of, and you're going to get more of it today, because that's what we talk about. So I just talked a lot. Johnny, do you have anything that you wanted to, in your summary of this chapter?
Yeah, I actually have a couple of YouTube links if you want to use them, because he talks about things like Keynes. Keynes becomes like a very central figure, right? About this. So I have like a 1 minute video we show for.
I want to go a little bit more chronological here. So
okay.
I want to talk about kind of what preceded Keynes, in terms of the Roaring.
All right, then I have a video, like an 8-minute video, but like, I don't know if you're up for that, for the Bonus Army Explained. I don't know how many of you know anything about the Bonus Army, but the Bonus Army was like, World War I vets that were promised a bonus that, they did not get. And they created a group that pretty much was about ready to march on Washington. They actually surrounded the White House. And pretty much that is what pressured FDR into creating, things like the GI Bill and, the New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone was still suffering at the fate of the Great Depression, crushing poverty.
I want to go a couple steps back into what actually kind of the mechanisms of all of these things, and a little bit of statistical evidence of everything like that, just so that we can kind of illustrate how these things played out.
And then there's also the business plot. We have to do that.
Okay. All right, no problem. So if you hear me kind of going through what I have prepared, and you feel like we've hit a point where it's going to be really, really poignant for you to interject with a video, just let me know, and we'll keep it, along the agenda, so it accentuates the proper time periods.
Got it.
Okay, cool. Let's see here. So I actually pulled up a historychannel.com article here. And you'll notice this a lot, that on this stream, I like to pull up extremely non-controversial, non-esoteric documentation for a lot of the things that I discuss. You're going to see a lot of Wikipedia and very surface level sources to kind of show that this isn't some kind of extremely niche academic opinion that I just kind of quote mined, in Google Scholar to be here, this proves my point. I found this extremely small area of academia that does suggest this. Oh, we got to thank you for the subscription, Sam.
Thank you for subscribing at tier 1.
I believe you're our very first subscriber, so thank you so much.
Sam is the ultimate fan. They are the subversive right now.
Mm-hmm. So I'll bring this up right now. It's relatively short. I kind of wanted to read through it real quick because, like, even though it's the History Channel, which most of their content I find, well, if it's not like Ice Road Truckers or something like that, but like their actual like historical content, I find dismal in terms of its representation. But I actually think that this article did a super good job of breaking this down.
Your Che Guevara hood is in the mail.
Funny thing about Che Guevara hood. When I was in Guatemala, and I was actually talking with some of the radical teachers who were a part of like the clandestine leftist movements of the 1980s. These guys would actually meet in like what almost looked like KKK outfits, because in the 80s, being a leftist was essentially a death sentence if you were caught like coordinating with like leftism and indigenous activities, indigenous organization activities in Guatemala. The genocidal government of Rios Montt would absolutely just exterminate you, exterminate your village. This was widespread in Guatemala throughout the entire Civil War. So these teachers that were part of these leftist movements would meet in these clandestine secret meetings, where they would dress up in what they were making no ode to the Ku Klux Klan, obviously, but they would wear these hoods that looked just like KKK robes, because they couldn't have their identity get around. And when I interviewed one, I went to his home in Xela in Guatemala, which is a very indigenous city. I went to his 1-bedroom apartment, of which he had a framed picture of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara over his bed in his 1 bedroom. And he showed me some of these old hoods, and one actually was a let me see if I can pull up the picture real quick. One actually was a Che Guevara hood that he wore.
Yeah, let us know in chat how you feel about someday making this like, you know, official Subversive history merch.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll find this, but yeah, he actually had a hood that went over his face that appeared as though it was Che Guevara's face with the eyes cut out, that he would wear for these.
Sure, Edward.
Yeah. If you ever are in Guatemala and you want to go down to the indigenous neighborhoods and let them know that, you can have a conversation with them about it. I'm not going to necessarily. I'm not here to make an endorsement or to tell you that you should go ahead and hang anything up on your wall. I'm just letting you know what I saw while I was in Guatemala visiting indigenous communities, and it was a really great trip. It was one of my favorite countries that I've ever visited. I was there for 6 weeks. It was incredible. So yeah, I'm not gonna find this right offhand. And I apologize for that. But
all right, no, we'll bring it up again later.
I'll say that. Yeah, I'll say that. I apologize. I'm not going to waste time doing this. So I got so sidetracked there. We're going to go back to what I was talking about in terms of the Roaring 20s.
The Roaring 20s.
Guatemala is north of Venezuela. I'm not sure if that's the point that you were making, but Guatemala is north of Venezuela. Oh, okay. Well, when you said I'd been as far south, it almost made it seem like I didn't go south enough. I didn't know what I didn't know what your point was there. Did it come off? Is that just me, or did it come off like that? Like, oh, like I've only been as far south as this place. I've never been to Guatemala. Yeah, I know that.
I don't know. I don't know what point.
I wasn't confused about that part.
I haven't spanned every country due north of Venezuela. Okay, well that's cool. You know, I mean, like, look,
I've done
there's
Peru. I've done Peru. I've done Colombia. So I've done a couple in that region. But let's get to the content. I don't want to get too bogged down talking. And I'm sorry if I came at you the wrong way, Edward. I don't know if that was disrespectful or I misunderstood what you were saying. I don't want to come off as a dick. So I'm sorry. All right.
welcome, Edward.
Lost up on me. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. Okay, so this is actually a really, in my opinion, a really interesting. No, actually, my girlfriend painted that. This is actually a really interesting article that I think really illustrates the dynamic of the Roaring '20s that ended up leading to the Great Depression. So I'm going to go ahead and read through this real quick. So in August of 1929, which is, if you're not aware, 1929 is when the Great Depression hit the United States. Ladies' Home Journal published an article titled "Everybody Ought to Be Rich." Businessman John J. Roscoe told Americans that if they invested $15 in the stock market every month in 20 years, they could have $80,000, which would be about $1 million in today's terms. Roscoe
All you need to do is invest $15.
Yeah. He insisted that almost anyone who's employed can do that if he tries. Now, tell me, is this not reminiscent of like the current like crypto culture where it's like, you know, everyone should be rich. There's no excuse not to be rich. You should just play crypto coin and this new coin, and you know, you just hold it and you just buy the GameStop and like whatever. I'm sorry, I don't really like, you know, get involved with all this stuff, but like there's this very similar kind of attitude today that like, oh, if you're just like playing the right investments and things like that, that like any person could be rich. There's no excuse to be in poverty. You know what I mean? For wealthy white Americans like Roscoe, the Roaring '20s was a time of immense economic prosperity. Yet for most Americans, it wasn't. Low-wage jobs paid an average of $25 a week for men and $18 for women. So if low-wage, they would have been placing most of a week's earnings in the stock market every month. So first of all, what he in his idea of what you should be putting in there would be like most of the food that a family would be eating to hopefully place it in the stock market, as we're going to come to learn, crashed. So you would receive no benefit there. So let's see.
But that's the other thing, like what Edward is talking about, where it was like it was leveraged because people were paying $15 a month. Like you said, you owned 100 times more the value. That's another thing, is that like the stock market to this day is speculative. It's not. None of it's real. It's not.
Listen, I don't want to take the things that I saw on Facebook or on Twitter as like sacrosanct fact, but did you see the thing where like somebody on Twitter paid for a verified thing and made it of some insulin company and then said
that was all over the internet, man. Yeah.
The company, not only that company, but other insulin companies, their stock apparently tanked for a moment.
Yeah. Dude, did you hear about like what was it? Lockheed Martin was another one that like, you know, somebody posed as Lockheed Martin and said a bunch of shit about like, you know, we were stopping all sales to the U.S. and Saudi Arabia until like their humanitarian crimes are investigated and their stock plummeted.
Well, I mean, we specifically implement things like Glass-Steagall, and then it was like undone by Reagan. So there's been like a little bit of like a volleyball type of situation back and forth with you know, regulations on finance and things like that. We can't really say that it's been exactly the same since the Great Depression and the era of Keynesianism. There's been like somewhat of a battle between like neoliberal and more interventionist policy.
Dodd-Frank was passed as a result of the Great Recession in the early 2000s. Glass-Steagall was a Clinton IRC.
Okay. So, in fact, income inequality increased so much during the 1920s that by 1928, the top 1% of families received 23.9% of all pre-tax income. About 60% of families made less than $2,000 a year. The income level the Bureau of Labor Statistics classifies the minimum livable income for a family of five. And then, as our Stream spiritual advisor, W.B. Du Bois, observed in 1926, we have today in the United States, cheek by jowl, prosperity and depression.
All right.
So here's like a big part of this. You see, farmers were stuck. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just gonna bring up like, you know, the what the hell is it that Hammer and Hoe about like,
actually W.E.B. Du Bois did not pronounce his name Dubois.
Yeah, I know. Du Bois.
Many French people would say Dubois. I once had a French landlord whose last name was Dubois, but Du Bois did not pronounce his last name like that.
Yeah. So, what the fuck is it? Like Hammer and Hoe, which is about like sharecropping. What?
I made that mistake for years. I called him Dubois.
Yeah, everybody does. Yeah.
Until I was corrected, and that he actually said Du Bois.
Yeah. Du Bois. You know. What the fuck is it? But Hammer and Hoe, which I believe is about 1920 sharecroppers. Like
in
I think
Alabama.
like in Alabama. The central message of it was that, like, when the Great Depression hit, right, for a lot of people that like may have been like that burgeoning like middle class before the age of the suburb, like, you know, this was like a very big deal. Like they lost a lot of money, but for a lot of like the black sharecroppers in the South, it's like, no, we've been here the whole time. We've been suffering like this the entire time, man.
Well, look, this actually, it's funny bringing that up. This actually goes right into that. The speakeasy party culture, popularized in books, movies, and magazines, was only accessible to a small portion of wealthy, urban, and mostly white Americans. Black Americans and immigrants faced violence from the newly revived Ku Klux Klan, and many workers' wages either didn't keep up with productivity or fell off completely. For farmers in particular, the Great Depression basically began after World War I. So the Great Depression, just like you said, is that like this was already something that was well underway prior to like what we know as the Great Depression of 1929. Yeah, no.
Thank you for the clarification, Sam.
During that war, U.S. farmers had increased food production to feed European allies. Afterwards, prices and demand dropped, and farmers were stuck with an oversupply that they couldn't sell. Coming out of the war, when exports fell, farmers get into this very unfortunate feedback loop, says David Cecilia, a history professor at the University of Maryland. Prices are falling, and in order to continue to survive, farmers basically respond by planting even more. So there's overproduction layered on top of overproduction, and so they get into this kind of vicious cycle. Overproduction also became a problem within manufacturing companies, and this is something that's going to get pointed to as a big cause of the Great Depression. Even though families that couldn't afford to pay for radios, cars, dishwashers, and other expensive items up front could now purchase them on credit. The amount of new products companies produced still exceeded the number that families were able to buy. One of the contributing factors to this overproduction was the company's desire to expand and drive up profits for shareholders. So this is like creates this dynamic that Jason Hickel brings up in the book that I actually have highlighted. We'll get to that once I'm done with this, that when you have companies that have a vested interest in selling their products for as much as they can possibly can and lowering the price of production as much as they possibly can and laying off workers when it's convenient and things like that, you get into this situation where you have overproduction and no way to sell the products that you've produced because you have essentially immiserated the working class because you won't pay them, because you won't employ them. And then nobody can buy the products that you're producing, much like the farmers that had a surplus because of the war effort that they were causing, and then demand plummeted, and they're left holding with all these crops that they need to unload. So this is a major factor in the Great Depression. So then you get into the anti-labor climate, which is another factor. There was a strong belief under the president of the 1920s that prioritizing shareholder profits would create a stronger economy. Robert
why does that sound so familiar? Like, why does
yeah,
why does that sound so relevant?
It's really sad, the ebbs and flows of like economic decision making in the United States, because you can go all the way back to like the robber baron era, then into like the roaring 20s, then again with like Reaganomics, and it's like this constant like issue of like liberalization of the economy and then strong state-led intervention to be able to like salvage what is left of the economy after it has been run roughshod by private interest. A history professor at the University of Maryland says that when New York Governor Al Smith tried to gain state control of hydroelectric development to give residents lower energy rates, a memorandum from President Calvin Coolidge's administration opposing the idea stated that it was acceptable for New York residents to pay a lot for electricity because this increased the price of stocks. Although many factory workers saw their wages increase modestly during the 1920s, these wages didn't keep up with their productivity. Most corporations rewarded their shareholders with large dividends while trying to keep worker wages low. It was difficult for workers to fight for higher wages because there was a movement in terms of more aggressive application of labor law, says Joseph Stelzner, an economics professor at Connecticut College. Courts often ruled in favor of businesses. The Supreme Court even struck down child labor law in 1918.
What?
Southern black workers,
shit that long?
yeah. Southern black workers, in particular, had little recourse against Jim Crow laws that forced them to work for low wages. In this anti-labor climate, unions were weak and strikes became extremely rare. So now we get into the more broad Great Depression causes.
You know that meme where like it's the dog where he's like no fetch, only throw, you know?
Yeah.
Right? It's like that meme where it's just like no pay, only buy. Just keep buying.
No wage.
Pay.
You
only buy.
Holy shit. Yeah. Okay. There were many factors that caused the Great Depression, but Cecilia argues that stock market crash in 1929 was not one of the major ones. This is definitely in conflict with like the major idea that the stock market crash. I'm not even saying that I wholesale even believe this. I understand that the stock market crash was like a insurmountable issue in terms of the Great Depression. I'm just reading out of this article.
So this dude's like an anti-gold bug?
I don't know. He's saying that it was not one of the major causes. Instead, he says the major drivers were more complex. One of the main factors was the government's adherence to the gold standard. Another, he argues, was income inequality that had developed throughout the 1920s. With increased inequality, you have a much less stable economy because of the fact that the most stable components of GDP is essentially consumption. Many Americans tried to call attention to this inequality by arguing that Coolidge prosperity was a myth. Prosperity, to the extent that we have it, is unduly concentrated, does not equitably touch the lives of the farmer, the wage earner, and the individual businessman, said Al Smith when he accepted the Democratic nomination for president in 1928. Smith lost the election to Herbert Hoover, who argued that Americans were experiencing prosperity. Soon after Hoover took office, the U.S. economy crashed.
What were those neighborhoods called that people
Hooverville,
lived in?
Hoovertown.
Yeah, like they literally like called them Hoovervilles.
Yeah. They were called?
So
I'll pull that up real quick. Hoover Towns. Oh, I guess it was Hooverville. Yeah, it was Hooverville. I'll pull that up real quick. That's relevant.
There's a song about that in the original production of Annie.
really?
Yes.
Thank you, Lily. Coming in with the hot tidbits.
Annie runs away and ends up in a Hooverville, and they sing a whole song called "We'd Like to Thank You, Herbert Hoover."
I don't remember that from the movie.
It's not in the movie; it's in the original Broadway production.
Oh, that's why.
Dude, thank you, Lily, for bringing that exceptional trivia.
Look, my degree has to be worth something.
Yeah, I'm not.
All that money I spent on a musical theater degree has to be worth something, Pat.
Really coming in clutch right now.
Hey, you just educated 14 people. Damn, get political. So, Hooverville was a shanty town built during the Great Depression by the homeless in the United States. They were named after Herbert Hoover, who was president of the United States during the onset of the Depression and was widely blamed for it. The term was coined by Charles Mitchelson. There were hundreds of Hoovervilles across the country during the 1930s. So, yeah, that's just a little. I wonder if there's anything about Annie in here. Look, Billy, musical Annie has a song called "We'd Like to Thank You, Herbert Hoover," which takes
Yay!
All right.
It's worth something. I can tell my dad that the $80,000 was worth it for this moment right here.
First things the hardships they now suffer is the Great Depression, their contempt for the former president. Okay.
So I have to get this out here because you're never gonna believe who I found a video of talking about the business plot. So for those in the know, the business plot happened in 1933, but maybe I'll just let the fucking thing share. How the hell do I share this thing? There we go. All right.
What the fuck is this?
Here we are. Well, I hope you've been well, but your dog's not looking so good. He just stands there and stares. That's the RCA dog. Everybody mentions that little little weak to my radio side as well, along with the microphone of yours. So you're also, in addition, you're on the
Is this a
radio
little hard to hear from anyone else?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Is the dog stuffed? Is that a taxidermy job? Or what are we looking at? Ceramic or?
It is difficult to hear. Let me see if the stream can hear it. Hold on.
No, I don't go that. I don't go that. They're a little disturbing as well.
Is the audio playing?
It's like I think I'm hearing it through your mic, not through.
Oh shit! All right.
I can't hear anything now.
Yeah, it's not playing. The audio's not playing through the stream.
Oh, son of a!
Share the tab rather than the window.
Share the tab rather than the window. How the hell do I do that?
Here, just send it to me. Just send it to me. Just send it to the.
I'm sorry. I'm still
It's
learning,
okay, old man.
Here, leave your share. Just send it in the Discord. I'll put it up. All right.
Thought I got the hang of it and I didn't.
Yeah.
Can't win them all.
Let's just remove this.
Let me know if you guys can hear
here.
What just happened?
Here we are. I hope you.
Can you guys hear this? Can you hear it?
Yeah.
That's the RCA dog. Everybody mentions a little weak to my radio side as well, along with the microphone of yours. So you're also, in addition to me, you're on the radio as well. iHeartRadio.
Okay, but tell me, is the dog stuffed?
I have to make this full screen so you guys can't see my Diablo 2 Resurrected video suggestions on the right-hand side. My embarrassing Diablo 2 Resurrected videos that I watch.
Is that a
Play your cards right, chat. Maybe we'll do an episode where Pat just plays Diablo 2.
He's plastic. You could.
Oh, okay. All right. He's quite
I
hypnotizing.
don't go that. I don't go that.
And a
dark,
little
Chris.
disturbing as well.
Hey, man, congratulations. You know,
Thank
the
you.
first question for you is broad in the sense that how did you do it? And here's what I mean by that. The casting, dynamic casting. We'll break that down here in a minute. But, you know, you had to deal with a pandemic, all kinds of challenges. How did you pull this off?
Well, we started this long before the pandemic. David and I started talking about this project 6 years ago. We would just sit regularly and meet in diners regularly and put this together and create characters. And then it was a very organic process because there was no rush, there was no timeline. Obviously, it was 6 years. It was just, hey, whenever we're ready, then we'll go do it. And we were just blessed with how many people started getting attracted to different characters that we had created. That David, you know, and this beautiful story that he made up, and also the discovery of this event in American history that was completely unknown to us, that creates the backdrop of the story. And then the creation of, we wanted to really make a film just all about humanity and friendship and love and how you overcome the trials of life, you know, and that there can be tons of pain and suffering, but just how much we were in love with people who managed to still be joyous and find wisdom.
Yeah, Christian Bale is Welsh, I think, right?
Hang around with, and that's what we really wanted to create, and in many ways, oh man, I missed that whole process. I loved putting this together with David.
All right, now that you've had a
Oh, no,
chance
he's
to
English.
work with Taylor Swift, does that officially make you a Swiftie? And if you don't know, that's what her fans are called.
Well, if I don't know that's what her fans are called, then I can't really call myself a Swiftie. So I've just learned that right now. So I'll go sign up immediately.
Absolutely. Well, you know, there's drama, there's comedy, there's some statements that are made in this movie. That
All
make
right,
you
I
think.
fucked up. I
Like
thought
you
this
said,
was going to
it's
be him
technical,
talking
part of
about
American history. A lot of
the
us don't
business
know.
plot.
I went down a rabbit hole after I saw this. What is the heart of the story to you, Christian?
The heart of the story is about heart. You know, I mean, you know, people can take the history of it and recognize, hey, history repeating itself. That's their choice. To me, when you finish making a film, the audience owns it. Whatever you think of it, you're right. You know, if people think totally different things about the film, they're both right, because you do own it. But for me, the thing that really moves me and gives me goosebumps and makes me want to just watch this film again and again is this friendship and this triumph of people who've been through hell. but who are kind of making heaven on earth for themselves. And they're just fun. It is a fun bunch to hang out with, and they stay joyful in the midst of these miserable bastards who we meet in the film. And I think everybody can relate to that in their lives.
Absolutely, my friend. You know what else is fun? Catching up with you. Great to see you again. You look amazing. Great job.
See you too. Bye, dog.
I did not pre-watch this at all. I just thought he was going to be talking about the fucking business plot, and I just wasted all of your time about some fucking Christian Bale movie you'll never see.
Well, to make up for it, I made you a present. Here we go.
Thank you. This is great. Thank you.
That's your meme for the day. It's going in the Discord server if anybody wants to have it.
Thanks.
So, in the book, during this time of what preceded the Great Depression, Jason Hickel refers to a stat of an increased share of annual U.S. income consolidated within the top 1%. And I just wanted to bring up a stat to kind of illustrate that a little bit, or just at least a graph to illustrate that. So if you look here, oops, I don't click the wrong thing. Okay, so annual U.S. income share of the top 1%. You can see here in 1928, it's at a record high. It has skyrocketed. Here we go. I'll point it over here. It has skyrocketed in the years following the war, when the war started, up through the roaring 20s, hit an all-time high, or an almost all-time high as of prior to 2007, the year prior to the Great Depression, and then it just comes absolutely tumbling down following that, following FDR's New Deal program and other more government-led interventionist policies, coming to a low in 1980 in terms of what is consolidated to the top 1%. Then comes up again in 2007, which I think we all know what comes shortly after that, which would be the 2009 recession. So it seems to be a pretty interesting pattern here between when wealth becomes over-consolidated into the top 1% and the ensuing catastrophic recession that occurs immediately after. So just kind of using that to set the stage for what were the 1920s in the United States, what conditions that the 1920s experienced, which led up to the Great Depression, and then now kind of like what occurred in the Great Depression and what that caused further from there. So just to get a little bit deeper into a quote from the book, I did want to read a portion of this regarding Jason Hickel's interpretation of this. So, and this is kind of echoes what I was stating before when we were talking, reading over that article. The problem, people began to realize, had little to do with the internal contradictions of As the Depression continued into the 1930s and the economy failed to recover, conventional views began to crumble and new economic theories emerged from the rubble. The problem, people began to realize, had to do with the internal contradictions of capitalism itself. Capitalists seek to maximize their profits by increasing productivity and decreasing the cost of production. The easiest way to decrease the cost of production, of course, is to push down workers' wages. But if this process is left unchecked, eventually wages get so low that workers cannot afford to buy the products they produce. Demand goes down, and the market becomes glutted with excess goods with no one to buy them. Goods quickly lose their value, businesses stop producing, and the economy slows down. This is what happens when capitalism is left to its own devices. It generates such extreme inequality that the whole system simply seizes up. So that is Jason Hickel's word-for-word description of the process of the Great Depression, and kind of sets the stage for what Johnny was referring to earlier, which is the advent of Keynesianism. Keynesianism is a kind of new economic theory, which comes onto the scene as a solution to the Great Depression, which sees more of a focus on, you could probably liken Keynesianism to like what a social democracy kind of is. Like, instead of restricting government spending, promote government spending.
It's
Widen
almost
government
like
spending.
it exactly is like social democracy.
Yes, exactly. You let capitalism occur with amendments on it that prevent the things of happening that I just described earlier, such as, these companies, laying off workers and not overproducing, and there not being enough money in the hands of the working classes so that they can at least consume the very products that are being produced. So this really comes together in the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1933, who goes on like a massive campaign of Keynesian-inspired economic policies. And probably the most, in my opinion, impressive of these policies were federally provided employment programs. This is something that I've always kind of, since I've gotten into leftism, I've always found the employment market to be a repugnant and disgusting concept. That there is like a market of employment, and there are where labor is a commodity. There's a labor market, and it is necessitated by a certain percentage of the population being unemployed as a way of, I guess you could call it, regulating wages. And you can see in some countries that have developed certain socialist experiments which aim to eradicate unemployment. You can actually see a microcosm of this in the United States under FDR, but also as a result of World War II. So FDR becomes president in 1933 and then initiates a bunch of federally provided employment programs. Some of the examples of these are the Lincoln Tunnel in New York and the Fort Peck Dam in Montana. This ensured that unemployed Americans could get federally mandated or federally provided jobs that paid well, had decent benefits, and things like this. When a broader portion of the population has more income at their disposal, consumer demand goes up, and this in turn stimulates the economy. Much like, as we read prior, it says that the consumer mechanism is like one of the largest driving forces in a healthy economy. I also do have this. You can check this out if you want. Here's unemployment. Unemployment rates in the United States from Depression era through post World War II. You can see unemployment very high here at the beginning of 1940, around the 15%, all the way down to 1944, where you can almost see. I'll show you this right here. This is from the New Deal Wikipedia page. Okay. Oh, no, not that one.
Thank you for the subscription, Tiniest Boop.
Thank you so much. There's actually a crazy statistic here. That apparently, I'm sorry that I don't actually, I thought I had this.
I have,
yeah, do you have something?
Yeah, I just posted it in the chat. If you want to throw it up there, it's the main.
Yep, and then I'll find it.
It's only a minute long. This one should definitely be more informative than watching Christian Bale talk about a fucking movie about the business plot without ever actually talking about the business plot throughout the entire fucking interview.
Shout out to Wolf. Shout out to Dorian. I appreciate you guys immensely.
Thank you so much. Can't hear a goddamn thing.
You can't hear it?
Can't hear it. Can you turn up the volume or anything?
Central banks need to step in during times of crisis so as to stimulate the economy
Is that
and
better?
to demand themselves when the private sector cannot. To put it in academic perspective, Keynes believed that demand creates supply in contrast to Say's law that supply creates demand. While he sometimes expressed skepticism, he was, believe it or not, for the most part, a supporter of free market solutions and keeping government interference in the economy minimal at the beginning of his career, like his father and most of his colleagues. That, however, changed in the 1930s. Some of his most important achievements include 1. Publishing The Economic Consequences of Peace in 1919, where he criticized the Treaty of Versailles and explained that burdening Germany with debilitating war reparation demand would backfire. 2. In 1923, he released a tract on monetary reform, with many misinterpreting his "in the long run we're all dead" quote as a YOLO-like invitation to seize the moment and not care about the future. That wasn't what he meant. He was strictly referring to aspects related to inflation, more specifically to using the quantity theory of money. That's it. 3. In 1936, he published The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, the foundation of Keynesianism. 4. In 1944, he was the leader of the UK's delegation at the Bretton Woods Conference. However, the influence of the United States prevailed, with resulting institutions such as the IMF and World Bank being more in line with the vision of the US than that of Keynes.
All right, awesome. So while we watched that very informative video, I was able to pull up exactly what I was describing, and I apologize. World War II and full employment. So it's just so crazy for me to read this, because it's like the concept of full employment is like such like a foreign and alien concept to me, that like, you know, that unemployment is something that should just always exist. It's like a natural consequence of developed society or something like that. But we actually have an example right here in the United States, within the modern history, where we achieved full employment. And when I first read this, I thought that it might have been like a misnomer or some kind of like a misconception. And I actually found it right here on Wikipedia, where it says the U.S. reached full employment after entering World War II in December 1941. Under the special circumstances of war mobilization, massive war spending doubled the gross national product. Military Keynesianism brought full employment, and federal contracts were cost plus. Instead of competitive bidding to get lower prices, the government gave out contracts that promised to pay all the expenses plus a modest profit. Factories hired everyone they could find, regardless of their lack of skills. They simplified work tasks and trained the workers, with the federal government paying all the costs. Millions of farmers left marginal operations, students quit school, and housewives joined the labor force. The emphasis for war supplies as soon as possible, regardless of the cost and inefficiencies. Industry quickly absorbed the slack in labor force, and the tables turned such that employers needed to actively and aggressively recruit workers. As the military grew, new labor sources were needed to replace the 12 million men serving the military. Propaganda. This is just goes on to say that, like, you know, they brought in women and the old and things like that. But there's evidence that shows that when there is a legitimate state-led program for jobs, unemployment can be eradicated. It's been done in other countries as well as even in the United States. So I thought that was really interesting just to read that. What'd you say?
So the GDR, German Democratic Republic.
Sure. Yeah. So I feel like I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry. Is there anything that you wanted to put in here?
I mean, as far as like full employment and stuff goes, like I think Marx talks about it, like literally, what is the term that he uses? Like the oh god damn it, the surplus army of workers, something like that. Like without those people willing to take up the jobs for lesser wages than whoever was working that job beforehand, capitalism pretty much falls apart.
Yeah. Well, this is the idea of a labor market. So you can't have a labor market without a unemployed class or a unemployed demographic of society, because the unemployed is what reserve army of labor. There you go. Thank you, tiniest boop. The unemployed is what is essentially like a regulatory mechanism for what labor could cost in a market. It follows like similar dynamics of supply and demand. What is the supply of labor? What is the demand for labor? And this whole thing can be eradicated, and we don't have to have people that would like to work and cannot work and thus must like exist in poverty because the system necessitates some millions of people unemployed. So I think that's an important lesson that can be learned from all of this. It's important to note also that Keynesianism failed many minority classes. Most of the benefits that were garnished under Keynesianism would fall into demographics that were white, male, and straight. It did little to assist in the economic plights of Black people, women, homosexual people, things of that nature were drastically left behind in the miracles of Keynesianism. So that's important to note, that this, was not like the one side end all be all of economic policy.
Oh, the only other people besides like straight white men that benefited and like kind of, it's like debatable, is like closeted married lesbians. It's not, for sure it's an arguable thing, but like, their men were gone, right? The beards were gone, they were at war, right? And like a lot of times it was just like a workplace like with women, suddenly they got to you never seen like any of the movies or anything about that?
I don't think so.
No?
Sorry, I'm not
Okay, whatever, forget it.
So this,
I know somebody who could talk about that at length.
So essentially what the lesson here is, or like what to take away from all this that we were just talking about, is that the 20s were a disaster, led to a further disaster into the 30s, and the only remedy for that disaster was a heavy-handed government approach to eradicating unemployment, imposing the highest taxation that we've ever had on the highest marginal tax rate that we've ever had on the richest people in the country, because as I showed before in the graphs, that it was the largest consolidation of wealth in the 1% prior to 2007.
And if like I have other videos regarding the business plot, but pretty much like the gist of it is I don't know, maybe like this one, will work. A couple of these I have not pre-watched.
Yeah.
But this one should be pretty good. And this is Smedley Butler. Smedley Butler was a decorated World War I vet. I think he was a Marine. And basically there were these businessmen, mostly like bankers, that wanted to overthrow FDR and put this man, Smedley Butler, because of his notoriety, into power.
Funny thing about Smedley Butler, he wrote a book called
War is a Racket.
Yeah, where he calls him, where he states out he was a gangster for capital. He was a soldier for capitalism, and he was actually, when you actually read his military history, he was actually involved in like pretty much all of the most significant military conflicts, from like the Boxer Rebellion up to like World War I believe one, but the Keynesian policies of employment. Yeah, exactly. Like it went from the Keynesian operation of the 40s, which just absolutely neglected them, to like the current era of social democracy, where it's just kind of like whitewashed lip service bullshit, nominal bullshit towards minority classes, while also like reaching unequal exchange from the third world. So absolutely agree.
Yeah, I put this video in the chat if you want to throw that up there. It's Major General Smedley Butler bears plot by fascists in Newtown Square.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I was absolutely agreeing with you.
One day I'll learn how to do this.
Appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff, or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government. I talked with an investigator for this committee who came to me with a subpoena on Sunday, November 18th. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee. My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institutions. I want to retain the right to vote, the right to speak freely, and the right to write. If we maintain these basic principles, our democracy is safe. No dictatorship can exist with suffrage, freedom of speech, and press.
This is Democracy Now!
I feel like that video kind of undercut the absolutely like based mentality of Smedley Butler. You know what I mean? Like it did come off a little bit, you know.
What, Radley?
Yeah, because he pretty much just said, you know, as long as we have suffrage and a free press, freedom, not, you know, nominal freedom of speech, then dictatorship cannot occur.
And that's how I want to tie that into current day, right? Like whistleblowers and like people like against war. You can be anti-war and be a lib. You can be all those things, but it's like, how anti-war can you be if you are still supporting the very thing that's foundation is upon the genocide of another people, the enslavement of other people, whether if not here, then abroad, you know, as we've discussed, you know, at length in like previous episodes. That like, you know, Smedley Butler remains like dedicated and loyal, right, to his capo, the US, you know, like he was all about you know, the US. Yes, war is a racket and war should stop, but like not America. But that's the thing, is that like America is fueled by what is it, inequality of wealth, of rights, you know, I mean. Like.
And Stoic, thanks for that contribution in the chat. Maybe I have a little bit of like a rose-colored perspective of Mr. Butler. I actually live in Philadelphia now. I'm from the Philadelphia area. I knew he was from there. I believe there's a couple streets named after him. If you live in the area, I really had no idea about him like militarizing the police department or anything like that. So much appreciated for that. Much appreciated for that contribution. We're all still learning here. I have downstairs. I have a copy of War is a Racket, and that is like probably the majority of the information that I have about old Smedley Butler. So, you know, obviously if there's any criticisms that can be levied against him, I welcome that. And also for any other topic that we discuss in here that we may be overlooking certain facts.
100%. All of our favorites are problematic.
Yep.
And they always will be.
So, one of the many contradictions of it. Yep. Very much agreed. Thank you so much for the contribution. Appreciate you being in the chat. So the broader point that I want to make here about the events that led from the 20s to the Depression to Keynesianism to FDR to all these things, that this created a climate in the world that Keynesianism was like the new hot economic policy, and other countries wanted to adopt this policy. It was not something that just the United States did. The United States was doing so amazing. We saw some of the greatest periods of economic growth in the United States during the time that we followed a Keynesian economic policy. Other nations sought to emulate this as well. And this coincides with probably one of the more significant anti-colonial movement. I don't know if I would call it a movement, but just the vestiges of formal colonialism were falling apart by this point. You know, India achieved independence in 1947. Many of the African countries that were colonized by the French left Syria and Iraq, or not Iraq. Was it Iraq? Syria and Lebanon. I'm sorry. Syria and Lebanon. Nasserism was taking place in Egypt. Ghana became independent in 1957, and even along with this, FDR implemented his good neighbor policy, which I actually have here. I just wanted to bring this up because it's a pretty monumental thing that soon was eradicated. But the good neighbor policy, if you listen to, like, you know, all the Monroe Doctrine style interventions that occurred prior to the Cold War, the good neighbor policy was a foreign policy administration of the United States. His main principle was that of non-intervention and non-interference in the domestic affairs with Latin America. It also reinforced the idea that the United States would be a good neighbor and engage in reciprocal exchanges with Latin American countries. Overall, the Roosevelt administration expected that this policy would create new economic opportunities in the form of reciprocal trade agreements and reassert that the influence of the United States in Latin America. However, many Latin American governments were not convinced.
I wonder why.
Fascist coup in Guatemala in 1944. Because didn't
Cuba was like off.
Didn't Arevalo get into power in 1944, and then the coup was in 1954, right?
Yeah. I just threw another link in the chat for about the good neighbor policy. It's about like.
And I'm not saying that, and I'm not trying to say that that FDR like was some kind of like, you know, amazing person that didn't. There's plenty. You know, these were like the time of the Japanese internment camps and things like that. Okay, yeah, maybe I'm not specifically familiar with the one that occurred in 1944, because what I read is that, you know, the overthrow of Ubico was actually kind of like stubbornly accepted by the United States. That they were kind of like, well, there was Arevalo. Right. Ubico was overthrown by Arevalo, and then it went directly from Arevalo to Arbenz. I don't know if there was any other individuals that led during that time.
I think it went directly from Arevalo to Arbenz. If I'm recalling what Piero Gladys.
Actually, hold on. Wolf Skeptic is probably right here. I think I know what they're referring to. So the revolution, there was a military junta that was developed immediately afterwards. So it's not like Arevalo was like immediately ushered in as the leader. There was a military junta where 3 generals took power, one of which I believe was Arbenz. Another 2, I don't actually remember their name. And then they were like, in this time frame, we're going to have elections so that we can elect a president. And they agreed that it wouldn't be one of those 3 people. And as like a sign of like good faith towards like the Guatemalan people, that like, just because we took power in this military coup, one of us 3 won't do this. So then they elected Arevalo, who was like an exiled Guatemalan academic who was living in Argentina at the time. We're getting way off topic. I don't want to get into an argument with the amazing Wolf Skeptic, who I do believe is amazing. I think that's probably what they were referring to, is that it wasn't just like immediately Arevalo in 1944. There was a military junta, there was an election, there was probably someone that the United States was vying for.
Oh, absolutely.
That was probably far more fascistic than the progressive Arevalo, but that's no. I mean, I will extend like the most significant charity to like the sincere people that take part in our chat. You know, I know that the amazing Wolf Skeptic from our first conversation is very knowledgeable on a lot of different things, especially on South American politics. So, well, this isn't South American, this is Latin American, Central American, but so. Good neighbor policy. I was just kind of pointing out a broader trend in like, and I use air quotes here, anti-colonial sentiment following sentiment. And a lot of this had to do with sediment, anti-colonial sediment, you know, the sand. No, I'm just kidding. Sentiment. The anti-colonial, at least, the vibe, the anti-colonial vibe. And you can I would definitely agree that a lot of this was nominal. And this wasn't some kind of like a transition to like literal anti-colonialism. It was a departure from the formal colonialism where you have like, you know, boots on the ground control, administrative control of a country. And this ushers in the more neo-colonial process of controlling, dude, there it is.
No, it's way before that. Oh, thank you, Horse, for joining chat.
So much that we can never the connection between Jason Hickel and Jackson Hinkle, but we can just keep memeing it and laughing about it.
Yeah, I'm sure that Jason Hickel, ever since Jackson Hinkle, rose to notoriety, has been feeling so great about how his name is so similar to him.
I'm just trying to mentally cancel you, but Wolf Skeptic. I would, so if you go back and watch like the past 3 streams where we've been going over the beginnings of this book and like kind of like what made the foundation of like the current economic system, the Eurocentric economic system that we exist in. There's a ton of factors that were in play well before Woodrow Wilson was probably even born that set the stage for like the current level of American exceptionalist geopolitical structure that we exist in. But all of these events, such as Woodrow Wilson, have just compounded that further and further and further.
NSC 68.
And this is like talking about America as the imperialist machine of today. America is like born of imperialism. It is like the poster child for imperialism. It was the poster child for Hitler's colonial policy of controlling Europe. It is like the ultimate culmination of imperialism. It was birthed into the, what's that thing with Bane? Like he's like, you visit the darkness. I was born. I don't really watch the movies. I've seen it in
you merely adopted the darkness. I was born.
Just doing a Sean.
It is more important to fully solidify American imperial ambitions into the ultimate military machine. And I don't know if you pulled up the Wikipedia page for NSC 68 that Horst just brought up. But we're at what? We're at like the end of World War II yet?
Yeah. This is kind of like the post-World War II era of, America is, doing very well economically based on like a Keynesian economic policy and the policy of FDR.
And because England, right, the UK under the Clement Attlee Labour Party, right, and whatever the hell his name is, that other guy, and FDR, right, they created the Bretton Woods Institution, right? The World Bank would finance reconstruction and development across war-torn Europe, and the IMF would finance state spending in countries experiencing economic slumps because they saw that, the economic instability, right, of post-World War I Germany is what gave rise to a lot of the sympathies that the Nazi Party, kind of stole from the Communist Party of Germany. And the last thing they wanted was more communists. So to ensure that the low demand of one nation wouldn't trigger a crisis across the region.
I don't want to be pedantic. Here. But I just feel like a bit unsure that we can even point into something that occurred in the 20th century as the key driver in what made America an imperialist machine. I mean, just in the foundation of the United States, it's literally founded on the dispossession and the imperialism of almost an entire continent. This was the playbook. I in my opinion, and I don't want to get too, like I said, I don't want to be pedantic and I don't want to be disagreeable, but at what point could you even say that they really turned the corner? Because even in the transition from being a British colony to a independent nation, was the foundation of this was slavery, dispossession, imperialism of what would be the Americas and also Mexico, and then into Hawaii and also other imperial projects, and doing things with what was the treaty that they did in Japan to force Japan into trade liberalization. That was in the late 1800s. I think that was under Taft. You know what I mean? We're there. I don't believe that there was a single point in the history of the United States. We're going to talk about Sullivan and Cromwell in 1 second because Eisenhower's about to be president, and you know what happens then. So
just you hold your fucking horses.
But yeah, I think I just struggle with even imagining the United States existing, and as it came into existence. Well, we can go back to the Glorious Revolution and talk about of England. And if you went to our last stream, we kind of talk about the transition into capitalism, the liberal revolution that happened in places like Guatemala, quote unquote liberal revolutions, and like where like sometimes the like feudal orders of society were like wrenched into mechanisms of wage labor through land dispossession. This is like called like enclosure in Britain. And I'm sorry, we really covered all this in the last stream. If you want to watch the last stream, this is covered in the book and we go over it. And I don't want to completely, stray off the path here, but I do appreciate everybody in the chat that's like bringing these points. I love discussing this stuff, and I absolutely support anyone bringing any kind of topic or disagreement or a different angle that I may not be seeing in the chat, and I love addressing it. So I definitely don't want to come off as a dick to anybody.
I will say this though, Horst does bring up a good point that like NSC 68, right? Right, is definitely, I guess, what you could call like a heel turn, not from overall like U.S. policy historically, but definitely a heel turn away from like things like the good neighbor policy, and those things that at least FDR was, we can hypothetically say intending to work alongside the Soviet Union.
If imperialism was like a torrential downpour, FDR was like a limp newspaper that you hold over your head. Like there might have been some good intentions, that you could find within that. I'm very much not in the game of exonerating American presidents at really any point. And you could probably find a laundry list of disgusting things that were carried out under the FDR administration. Like you can point to some domestic things that were very beneficial for some workers and things like that, and like also like
as long as they were men and white and straight, it was good. Yeah, it was great.
Exactly. But so I agree though with what you're saying that like there was some like nominal lip service. Amazing Wolf Skeptic, you actually the fact that you even brought that up right there was actually interesting, because there's a video where like Noam Chomsky's on some talk show and he like shoots like rapid fire through like a list of US presidents and just like offers like a laundry list of all like the messed up things that they've done. And that's actually what I was thinking about FDR, because I know he goes into like pretty significant detail on FDR. So like I was actually thinking about that as I was like adding my qualifying statement that like I know that FDR wasn't some saint. Nice. Okay.
Nice.
Moving on. So again, Keynesianism is working great in the United States. Other countries want to emulate this,
right?
And they actually have a little bit of freedom to do this, because a lot of these countries are gaining some degree of independence and not under like the boot of formal colonialism. So a lot of these countries are like, wow, we finally aren't like the captive hostages of European business interest. How should we fix our economies?
Well, let's do what like the West did in order to get where they are.
Exactly. Let's emulate some of those great policies that are working out for the United States. Well, in 1953, Dwight Eisenhower is elected president, and he essentially says, nah. That's actually what's in the CIA documents, is that Dwight Eisenhower said, nah. So go ahead. Did you want to say something?
The only thing I would point out is that like, and I'm always going to point this out whenever his name comes up, especially since reading most of Domenico Lacerdo's book on nonviolence, that Mahatma Gandhi was absolutely like willing to cape for the English till his dying fucking day. Fuck Gandhi. That's it. That's the only point I want to end on before we move on to like, this section, titled A Miracle in the South, because he mentions that like fairly early on, and I'm like, why the fuck is his name coming up?
We kind of briefly covered that already, that whole like Miracle in the South. Hey, what? How did Sam get censored there?
That's the new. I'm working on that. That's the new. Sorry, okay. Give me a second.
We're sorry, Sam. Thank you for taking one for the team. And
you just martyred yourself for the cause.
We salute our martyrs here on Subversive History.
Yeah, I gotta turn off the auto mod stuff. Sorry, Sam. I'll get to you in just a second.
for after stream. Okay. When Gandhi
Okay.
lived in South Africa, he made many writings about how he believes Indians and whites are superior to black people. And that
Exactly. Like he literally fucking what the fuck is it? He what do you call it when you like try to like sign people up for the military and shit? He like recruited for like the English colonial military to go fight against the Boers that were just fighting, you know, to not be, you know, royal subjects of the fucking English monarchy.
I think that Mahatma Gandhi is kind of like, I don't want to say the Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King was actually like based. If you read
MLK wasn't fucking recruiting for
No, but
like,
I'm saying,
you know,
like,
the
he
National
was, like,
Guard.
selected, but he was like selected as like the most modest representative of independence in India, so that they could like distract from all the actual extremely radical and like, you know, communist, you know, opponents of British colonialism. So like, you know, you kind of have to be like, hey, look, this guy's talking about nonviolence. Like, this is the guy that we need to be like, you know, heralding as like the leader in this case. But that was that's the only reason, is because they both kind of like took like this nonviolent approach, and like the broader historical kind of record really highlights them as opposed to like their peers that were more radical.
Right.
That's the point that I wanted to make.
Like, well, it's another stream for another day. When we start reading Domenico Lacerdo, like if we do nonviolence, you'll see what I'm talking about.
I haven't read that book, so I agree.
Dude, he was a fucking piece of shit.
Like I was saying, so kind of like the flagship scenario that illustrates U.S. foreign policy post World War II and the beginning of the Cold War would be Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran.
Yes.
Iran was a early proponent of this dynamic that we're discussing. Thank you, Lily, for providing the Chomsky video that I was referring to. Oh, cool. You have a video here? Yeah, we'll put this up because I was going to go off memory of this.
No, I got you. I think especially because of everything that's going on in Iran today, right? If anybody is going to try and bring up what is happening in Iran today without tracing back the history, you know, and like we talked about, I think fairly on, I think maybe in the second episode or the first episode where we were talking about this book, I think it's very important that, like, you know, the things that are happening today have sites of construction historically and socially in these events, right? We're a very materialist analysis based Twitch stream. And I think that understanding, like, you know, what happened with Mossadegh and like what he was trying to do, and the not only just like the causes, but like, you know, everything that happened afterwards, right, leads to the current situation in Iran, right? It's kind of like, for those in the know, my fellow war nerds, right? Like, you know, without the English intervening, without like America intervening, like, you know, radical, you know, Islamic extremism would be like, you know, a fucking rural backwoods, you know, thing that like would be on the fringes of society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the thing that, like, you know, we talk about like every other couple fucking years when there's a presidential election coming up. But let's go to the video.
There's also a book I have called The Myth of Islamic Confrontation. Dude, I can pull up the author on that one. Oh, I'll find that later. I'm sorry. I don't want to distract. Can you hear this? Or is this a...
So one of the driving forces is sort of all of these big things that we study in history, whether it's capitalism or industrialization or war, are resources. That's what colonialism is about. It's about powerful countries determining that they're going to stay in power by extracting resources from the colonies. And so what's endemic in all of this is a power struggle. It means that the metropoles, the main sort of cities and the main countries, have control over the resources from the countries in which these resources originate. So the British controlled the oil resources of Iran. And that was extremely important to sort of helping to fuel the British Empire in one way. When in 1950, Mohammad Mossadegh came to power as the prime minister of Iran, he was the first third world leader to nationalize resources. So this was a huge move in the sense that he said, it makes no sense for our country to have all of these resources that other countries are becoming rich off of, and we get basically pennies in return. So that was one of the things that made him very popular within the country, is that in some ways he spoke truth to power, and he was willing to take the risk and to stand up to these powerful foreign countries. So he nationalized the oil in 1950 and basically kicked the British out. And the British had by that point a very long history of dominating the oil in the south of Iran. But that's very much the reason why Mossadegh was such a powerful and such a popular leader in Iran. Once he kicked the British out, the British thought that they needed to do something in order to get back in and in order to be able to have control over oil again. Because if you don't have control over resources like that, it's very difficult for you to maintain your empire. And so they began to try to convince the Americans, Eisenhower at the time, that Mohammad Mossadegh is a communist. And if we remember at that time, one of the biggest things that was happening was the Soviet Union versus the United States and the beginning of the Cold War. So this fight sort of fell into that rhetoric of the Cold War. And Iran is very close to Russia geographically. So this was important. Finally, the British were able to convince the Americans that this is what was happening, even though on the ground that's actually not what was going on. And so the CIA and the MI6, the British intelligence agency, created a coup in Iran in 1953. So it removed that prime minister and it reinstated the Shah. This became a huge moment in Iranian history and US-Iran relations because many Iranians felt that the United States intervened in its domestic politics and took away someone who many people felt was doing the right thing for Iran and then instead instated a dictator. And then once the coup happens, both British and American oil companies got, again, very favorable contracts over the oil in Iran.
Yeah, I also have a video that I just posted in the chat of CIA involvement in 1953 in the Iranian coup, and they were absolutely involved in it. They never played a passive role in basically any of this, right?
Yeah, it was Kermit Roosevelt.
Yeah, it was literally like the grandson or the nephew of fucking Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt carried on his family's imperialist legacy,
right,
by being the on-the-ground correspondent agent, whatever you want to refer to him as, that was instrumental in driving the political overthrow of the democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. And this is right here where you see like the house of cards start to come apart for the American empire, where you just a few years prior, you have Truman issuing his Truman Doctrine, stating that the United States had this glorious responsibility, almost endowed, divinely ordained to be the enforcers of freedom and democracy throughout the world. And then within years of that, you see this style of profoundly undemocratic and antithetical to freedom, to any nation that resists American or even Western business interest. Because like I said, we're dealing with mostly like a British company here, but obviously there's like an interconnected relationship between British petroleum, or not British petroleum. This is, that is BP, right?
Yeah, no, it's British petroleum. This is,
but the Anglo-Iranian is BP, right?
Yeah, and this is actually, I believe, prior to Thatcher privatizing BP. So this is when it was still a nationalized, oil company.
Like decades before Thatcher.
Yeah, so this is like 40 years. This isn't even like, oh, private, like, CEO of like BP wants to, fucking overthrow this like leader, which, we're going to see a lot of, right, in the coming chapter, right? This is when it's still like a national like company, right? So this is directly in line with like the state. This isn't even like private actors or some shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, just to further kind of like bring this together here, Eisenhower brought in for this like nascent a semblance of the CIA, brought in the Dulles brothers.
Oh my God.
Familiar with Cold War foreign policy and the early endeavors of the CIA, you will likely be extremely familiar with these two individuals. That is John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. John Foster Dulles was put to the Secretary of State by Eisenhower, and Allen Dulles was appointed the head of the CIA, which there was a different name for it right before it became the CIA.
OSS.
Exactly. Okay, there you go. And then this was like where the CIA, as we know it and despise it, formally became what we know, how we know it. So important to note that prior to being in these government positions, I think it was Stoic that brought this up, they both worked as lawyers for a firm called Sullivan and Cromwell.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that relevant? Because Sullivan and Cromwell represented familiar names such as J.P. Morgan, the Cuban Sugar Company, and the United Fruit Company.
United, like the fruit company with like the lady with the fruit on her head and stuff, like the people with the bananas.
Yes, the United Fruit. Also, in addition to the endearing cartoons, also essentially wrenched the nation of Guatemala into a private fiefdom where they could essentially exploit what is essentially forced indigenous labor so they can maximize banana profits at the expense of the nation of Guatemala. So now we have all rolled the road to each of these brothers.
The Dulles brothers are literally like Satan incarnate. Like, and this book doesn't even get into it, right? And like, I'm a little bit of like a believer in the fact that like I think the Dulles brothers had something to do with like the assassination of JFK. And that's like not to say that like JFK was like, some like good guy or anything, and he never did anything bad. Dude was obviously like a complex character. But the point is that like, well, when you think about it, ever since then, it's just like the CIA is just, especially when JFK was like allegedly planning to like disband the CIA because like they were extremely unpopular because they got caught going through everybody's mail, right? And like listening to people's phone calls. Tell me this doesn't sound familiar, right? It was incredibly unpopular, right? And for whatever reason, right? Right before that's supposed to happen, and like he was not going to commit ground troops to Vietnam allegedly. He gets his dome fucking blasted all over Jackie O. So like fucking. Oh, and then there's the McCarthy fucking witch hunts, which like fuck. God damn it. I wish we got more into inventing reality because like the McCarthy witch hunts, they only ended, right? Because these like right-wing anti-communists, instead of going after like labor leaders or actors or like people of like the opposing party, started bringing the witch hunt into their own party, and that's when it was like, oh no, this is done, this is over.
Like weaponizing it against their like potential opponents within the party.
Yeah, within the party. As soon as he started like trying to like point the gun inward, they were just like, whoa, no.
Yeah. So now what we see is the unholy matrimony that has always existed, but just more evidence of the unholy matrimony that exists between private interest groups and the United States government. And now we have in some of the highest echelons of government absolutely responsible for usage of State Department funds and almost a full autonomy in terms of trampling the autonomy of third world nations. You have two individuals who just months prior were lawyers rubbing shoulders and probably having cocktails with the CEOs and otherwise shareholders of massive corporations such as United Fruit Company. I don't think I need to spell it out any more specifically about how that causes issues, and it played out specifically. You can
Pat, are you trying to say that they were all on like a carousel together in like a smoky room discussing plans?
Read about this vividly and how this played out specifically in terms of the United Fruit in Guatemala. These two works are indispensable and also extremely enjoyable reads: Shattered Hope and Bitter Fruit.
I have the link for that, Sam. Thank you so much.
How do you have on some kind of a probationary period? Like, this is despicable.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna check out that series of videos. I don't know how we're gonna include it, but we will find a way in the future. I promise. I mean, if anything, I'm hoping one day that like we catch the attention of Ben Norton and that like we're able to actually invite him on at some point. But obviously, like let's get ourselves to a little bit more notoriety, and hopefully we can invite Ben on.
Sam, try posting your link again just for shit.
Discord.
And Nightbot shouldn't yell at you again.
It's okay,
and
Sam.
if they ban you, I'll just let you back in. It's fine.
I'm in the same boat. I can't post links either, or post videos.
There you go. It worked. All right, cool. All right, yeah, justice for Sam.
Justice for Sam.
Okay, so I think this is like the peanut butter and jelly of clandestine CIA operations. Iran, Guatemala. It's like they are the two most generally talking. Like obviously there's Chile that comes a couple decades later, but like when talking about like the Cold War implementation of subversive attempts to overthrow foreign governments, Guatemala and Iran are like generally the two that are the most brought up. How did this get up? Okay. So
when was Indonesia?
What?
No, never mind. Indonesia is way later.
Indonesia was 1965.
Right.
Another one that I wanted to bring up was in 1961, where I believe you would pronounce this João Goulart in Brazil. This is one that I'll admit to you right now that I don't know. I didn't redo a lot of reading about. Maybe Wolf Skeptic knows about this one because I know that they were bringing up the History of Brazil book to me, which I have yet to read. So they may be more knowledgeable.
I actually have a video on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If I can just pull it up. Is that the one that's PBS Success, or is that the one where it's
Guatemala?
Okay, PBS Success was Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, School of the Americas, Indonesia. Oh, never mind. I guess I lied. I thought I saved a video on Joe.
No problem. I have something here that we can take a quick stare at.
Oh no, here we go. Found it. It's only like 8 minutes long, which is like kind of long, but like I don't know. It's up to you. Here it is. Here's the link.
Well, real quick, I'm just gonna read over these. I just want to read over these two things that I have real quick, and then we'll put that on.
Right.
So, in 1961, João Goulart, he took an independent stance. He was elected in 1961, president of Brazil. He took an independent stance in foreign policy, resuming relations with socialist countries and opposing sanctions against Cuba. His administration passed a law limiting the amount of profits multinationals can transmit outside of the country. He nationalized a subsidiary of ITT, and he promoted economic and social reforms. The president of ITT, Harold Green, was a friend of the director of intelligence, John McCone. Director of Central Intelligence, John McCone. Between 1961 and 1964, the CIA performed psyops against Gouliart, performed character assassination, pumped money into opposition groups, and then enlisted the help of the Agency for International Development and the AFL-CIO. It has also been acknowledged that the Kennedy administration was the architect of the coup and that President Johnson inherited plans for it. U.S. President JFK had discussed options on how to deal with Goulart with Gordon and his chief of Latin American advisor, Richard N. Goodwin, in July 1962, and determined in December 1962 that the coup was necessary in order to advance U.S. interests. So
Like
there's another shot at Kennedy.
JFK was a complex man. No, I'm kidding. He was a piece of shit. Fuck him. Fuck all U.S. presidents. So, like, yeah. Were you able to pull up the link?
Tales of the American Empire.
Oh shit! No. There's the other one. Yeah, there it is.
Guy coup in Brazil.
Yep.
An exiled Brazilian colonel had this to say. In 1961, the CIA started an internal preparation for a military coup. First, they created a propaganda network with specialized personnel. And these people attempted to exploit all of the government errors and difficulties. And in the meanwhile, they spread disinformation and they created slogans which had nothing to do with the real situation. And all of this was to prove to the broad masses of people that Brazil was on its way to communism and that democracy had to be defended. So they organized CAMDE, the Women's Campaign for Democracy.
It's a progressive.
They directed this principally at women, playing on the feeling that women mainly have for the family and religion.
In April 1962, Brazil's President João Goulart visited American President John Kennedy. Brazil had supported the United States during World War II and even sent troops to fight in Italy.
Wow.
President Kennedy pretended that democratic Brazil remained a close ally.
26 years ago, President Franklin Roosevelt, in visiting Brazil during the administration of President Vargas, committed the United States to a great national and international effort to provide a more prosperous and fruitful life for the people of the Western Hemisphere. Brazil has attempted in the years since then to do that within her own country and within Latin America in Operation Pan America. And we have been attempting together in the Alianza para el Progreso in the last 15 months to work together for that effort, to provide housing for our people, education for our children, employment for our workers, security for our older citizens, a better and more secure life for our farmers, to realize in this hemisphere the hope of those who originally came here so many centuries ago. So, Mr. President, we look to the future, and we look to the future with hope. And our hope comes in part because of the leadership that you are giving to your own great country.
Soon after, Kennedy and his top aides began discussing the option of overthrowing the democratic government of Brazil. Goulart had begun raising taxes on corporations and increasing social spending. Later that year, the Kennedy White House was upset about President Goulart's independent foreign policy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy dispatched a special envoy, his brother Robert, to issue an ultimatum. Robert Kennedy met with Goulart on December 17, 1962. During the 3-hour meeting, Robert Kennedy warned Goulart that the United States had, quote, the gravest doubts about positive future relations with Brazil, given the signs of communist or extreme left-wing nationalists' infiltration into civilian government positions and the opposition to American policies and interests as a regular rule, end quote.
It's like
in March 1963, President Kennedy proclaimed, quote, "We've got to do something about Brazil," according to transcripts posted by the National Security Archive, linked below. He also said, quote, "I think we ought to take every step that we can, be prepared to do everything that we need to do," end quote. Kennedy believed Goulart was too friendly with anti-American radicals in Brazil. Operation Brother Sam was the code name given to Kennedy's military plan to, quote, "prevent Brazil from becoming another China or Cuba," end quote. After President Kennedy was assassinated, President Lyndon Johnson instructed his aides to send military support for a coup organized by the CIA with generals in the Brazilian military.
I think we ought to take every step that we can, be prepared to do everything that we need to do. Just had to get right on top of it and stick my neck out a little. We just can't take this one. And I would like to indicate that I'd like Bob McNamara to get some tankers ready for some POL supplies, things of that sort. Airlifts could be provided promptly if an intermediate field at Recife or other airfields in northeast Brazil, capable of having large jet transports, is secure and made available.
Yes.
President Johnson authorized fuel and ammunition, embarked on a U.S. Navy task force to support the coup against Goulart, which included the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal, 6 destroyers, and task force tankers deployed under the guise of a military exercise.
Anybody in chat actually ever heard of this?
Ammunition to a Brazilian airfield and 6 cargo planes and 6 aerial tankers, escorted by 6 fighters. The coup began on March 31st, 1964.
The mobilization by the U.S. military to conduct what in the old days, as the early 20th century, was called gunboat diplomacy, where we would overthrow small governments in Central America simply by stationing an armada of naval ships off the coast. Well, that was the idea that Lincoln Gordon had for Brazil in 1964.
On the day before the coup, Castillo Branco, who was then the chief of the Army General Staff, could not make up his mind. He wasn't sure that the coup would be successful. General Vernon Walter personally went to tell him that, yes, he should join the coup because, in case it was needed, the American fleet and naval task force was sailing close to the coast of Espiritu Santo, where the Marines would land to support the coup forces. And it was for this reason that Castillo Branco decided to support the coup.
From the declassified documents is that Lyndon Johnson, the President of the United States, was willing to implement a contingency plan for an overt invasion of Brazil to help the coup succeed. In the end, the coup succeeded so quickly that the U.S. military forces never were needed to help regime change directly. But had the fighting dragged on, we might well have seen an overt policy, an overt intervention from the United States.
The coup was successful as President Goulart fled to Uruguay, mostly to avoid bloody fighting. This resulted in a series of repressive pro-American military dictators who ruled Brazil for 21 years. It is difficult to understand why the American government frequently overthrows foreign governments for dubious reasons.
Is it that difficult?
This is done for national security reasons, but they consider anyone who defies orders from the United States a threat. They are no threat to American citizens, but to corporate profits and control of the world.
Kind of makes you think, like, wait, they're not a danger to American citizens, but they're just a danger to American corporate interests. Why do we keep overthrowing all of these governments? And it's like, I had never heard of this before this.
Sam, it's so funny you bring that up. I actually train jiu-jitsu, and I won't mention his name, but my instructor Yeah, I was gonna say Three Arrows. I'm sorry, I get so sidetracked, but I'm pretty sure Three Arrows has a pretty good documentary video essay on the situation that happened in Brazil. I believe I think he mentioned he like lived there as a kid with his father for maybe for like work purposes or something like that. He would spend time in Brazil, and he made a pretty good video about this whole situation. But Sam, also I trained jujitsu at a pretty known gym in that niche of society, and my instructor is rabidly anti-Lula. I think that's a pretty common. I think a lot in like the more maybe the wealthier Brazilians that you find in America, especially the ones that are like large in the jiu-jitsu scene, you'll definitely find conservative sentiment from them. And he's essentially like a Trump supporter, but like if Trump was Bolsonaro, the election's fraudulent, it was stolen, Lula is a communist criminal, blah 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 blah. I'm being friends with him on social media. I see these takes quite a bit, but
Pat just did his very damnedest not to dox himself, and I think that like
I wasn't even thinking
for that.
I wasn't even thinking for me. I was thinking more for him. I just wouldn't bring his name up, and like I don't know. But that is what it is.
Bring the history of military
really
dictatorship.
it's kind of getting, we've been streaming for a while, and I actually don't want to get too bogged down. We could sit here, we could make this stream weeks and weeks and weeks about dissecting every single coup that the United States, or like the intervention or political overthrow that the United States had a part in. It's extensive, and it requires reading, and if you want to know a lot about it, you can read Killing Hope by William Blum, where it goes, it goes like really in like an itemized fashion of just like every single, like it's not even in chapters, it's just in countries. So it's just like this, like Costa Rica, mid 1950s, and then it just goes, and it's like that has it, and then here Cambodia, 1955. Like I didn't even know something happened in Cambodia in 1955. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of like very eye-opening information in this book, Killing Hope by William Blum. I'm not sure personally. I don't actually use that term because like I don't know if it has like some kind of like an ethnic component to it.
So I'm going to tell you what the term means. The term gusano, worm, was first applied to Fidel Castro to counter-revolutionaries. Since then, it has been used proudly as a symbol by the opposition to Castro communist regime in Cuba.
Yeah, I've just heard some people, like there's been debate online about whether or not it's a slur. And I mean, like whether it is or it isn't, like I figured that like Cuban people can make the decision, or like other Latin American people can make the decision if they want to impose that title on someone. I just try to steer clear of, even if there's like a controversy around it. I don't know. I'm not Cuban. I'm not Latin American. I feel like if you feel comfortable calling like another Latin American person by that, I agree. I agree too. But I'm just saying, Dorian, I'm just saying that I haven't done the study to say whether it is or it isn't. So I mean, it's just kind of easy for me to just sidestep it, and I just don't.
All I'm trying to say is, if you're trying to tell me about how like your people in Venezuela long for freedom, and your last name is like German or some shit, it's it's a very I'm having a tough time taking your totally principled stance. You know what I mean?
So just to run through this real quick, just because like I said, we could go through all these coups, we could watch videos. We'll be here all night. So you can look into Guyana in 1953. You can look into the 1965 invasion of the Dominican Republic. You can look into things that happened in 1980s El Salvador, such as the El Mozote massacre. You can look into the continued situation that happened. People maybe bring up the CIA in 1954 in Guatemala, but the United States had an active role in supporting the Guatemalan military as it conducted genocidal extermination campaigns against Mayan indigenous people all throughout up until the 1991 when the Civil War ended. So that happens almost perpetually. You can read You can read the Jakarta Method by Vincent Blevins if you want to know how the United States aided and funded and supported the murder of roughly 500,000 to 1 million leftists in Indonesia. You can read Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neocolonialism, Last Stage of Imperialism, to learn about situations in Ghana and how in Ghana he was overthrown by a CIA coup. You can read about the School of Americas, about how the United States in Georgia had a school to bring Latin American.
Oh, they still do.
What?
They still do.
Yeah, to train them how to go and implement torture techniques and things like that back in their own countries. So on and so forth. You know, and I think I heard it in Nicaragua. You can read about the disgusting acts of the Contras, who were aided, funded, supported explicitly by the United States. You can look up the Iran-Contra affair. Obviously, that's one of the more well-known ones. Sorry, let me see what chat's saying. Since it mentioned Cambodia 1955, does the book also discuss when the USA funded Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge because they were anti-Soviet and anti-Vietnam as well? Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that that's one of the most critical aspects of the Pol Pot regime that need to be discussed, is that, you know, a lot of time that'll get brought up by some like free marketeer or a liberal or just a general anti-communist and be like, yeah, well, what about Pol Pot? Like, they killed these millions of people. It's like, well, for one, Pol Pot and his regime were supported by the United States. And secondly, they were opposed by other social. You know, I mean, I don't think that really holds any weight as a gotcha like you may think it does.
Yeah. I kind of wish the book did mention it, but sadly the book does not mention anything about Pol Pot.
Well, first of all, you've only read half the book. First of all, you've only read half. We've only read half the book.
Right. Yet. That's why I said yet. Y-E-T.
Okay.
Yet. There may be Pol Pot in the future. You know, everybody's favorite anarcho-primitivist may come into play.
Sam, I don't even want to impose that on you, like you were offensive or anything like that. I know many. I've literally only heard that online and not even in really like leftist circles. Like, I've probably heard that mostly from people that are like anti-leftist that probably want to disparage leftists by saying that word's a slur. So like, I'm not like an authority on that whatsoever. It's not something that I particularly heard. I've been to Cuba twice, and I didn't hear from anyone while I was in Cuba that was like an inappropriate term or anything like that. So just take that with a grain of salt. I'm sorry if I kind of like, you know, made a bigger deal about that than it was, but I wouldn't like run through the chat and start like banning people or censoring people because they said that specifically.
You need to have a struggle session because you use the term gusano and you're not Cuban and blah blah blah. I don't fucking care.
Yeah, Wolf Skeptic, those Cubans that you met would be exactly correct in that assessment, and I think anyone with like a principled and educated assessment of the situation would also make that. I'm sorry, I wish I could talk more about. I know I just pulled it up in the book and like held it up. I've read that book before. You know, I don't have everything committed to memory. I actually probably should do a lot more reading on the Cambodia situation. I kind of just know the spark notes of it offhand for this conversation.
Basically, as far as Pol Pot is concerned, if somebody's bringing up Pol Pot, right, as like an example of like a communist or socialist anything, they don't know what communism is. They don't know what socialism is, and arguably neither did Pol Pot. So, like, you know, that's that argument right there in a nutshell. You don't need to go any further than that. But I think like the main gist of like what we've come to realize, right, you know, before we go any further, is that so far all of these different movements, right, like a lot of them, you know, like the Brazilian guy, right, you know, even Arbenz in Guatemala, or like, you know, Mossadegh in Iran, right, none of them are like, you know, hammer sickle, you know, fucking communists.
No.
Like they're
I'm pretty sure Mossadegh actually, there's actually evidence of him like suppressing the Communist Party of Iran. I believe it starts with a T. I forget what it's actually called, but like, you know, and then also, I mean, Nasser, if you go on our Facebook group, I have a picture of the Bandung conference where you have Nkrumah, Tito, Nasser, Nehru, and Sukarno all together. And I personally, I love that picture of like third world countries coming together for the non-aligned movement to, you know, promote independent development but within their countries. But also almost every one of those people are worthy of criticism for a lot of the things that they did, especially Nasser. You know what I mean? Nasser, who's looked at as like a hero of Middle Eastern nationalism and did a lot of great things, was very repressive, should I say, was very repressive to the own Communist Party of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Mossadegh was a social democrat. It's Brazil. He was also a social democrat. Nasser was a Ba'athist, which is a socialist ideology that's firmly anti-communist. I don't know how firmly, and I might be speaking out of turn here, but maybe you can correct me, Wolf Skeptic. I thought the real vein of anti-communist Baathism started with Saddam. Like, it might have been a little bit more, I don't know if nebulous is the right term, but like prior to like Saddam, there was more of like a leftist tinge to the party. And then the non-leftist, the anti-communist elements of the party started to grow, and it became rabidly anti-communist to the point where they were being supplied with lists of names of communists by the CIA, which they used Saddam Hussein as their attack dog, essentially, who liquidated those communist elements. So I could be wrong in that.
There's always been anti-communist, even when they aligned with the communists when they overthrew the Iraq monarchy.
Oh man, what's the book that I read? It's called Bush in Babylon by
the way I understood it was that like the Baathists are like pan-Arab like social democracy.
Yeah. There's a book by Tariq Ali called Bush in Babylon about Iraq that has a lot of information about the Ba'athist party. I've only read it once. It's a kind of short book. I wish I knew more of it. That was the impression I have. I'm very open to being wrong about that. And I believe, you seem pretty confident in this. So I'm okay. All right. I believe that. I'm really not in a position where like have like a huge horse in the race on that one. So I appreciate you giving me more context on that. So thank you. Yep. So just kind of going through all that, we can talk about Patrice Lumumba and all these things. Like, you know what I mean? Like in the Congo, we have countless examples. Like literally this book is like, if you look at like some of the other books that I held up, this book, Killing Hope by William Blum, it's a huge inventory of how many times this happened. You can read that for the more exhaustive inventory that we're not going to be able to go into now. But the reason that this was called the age of the coup, because in this time where America was finally finally prospering from some competent state-led economic programming, they decided that there is state-led development for me, but not for thee, the third world, because we are still very much reliant on your cheap labor, your cheap resources, and we will keep exploiting you so that we can enjoy a higher standard of living here in the United States and other imperial core countries. Now, that brings us to like the next section of the book, which is called Meanwhile, Back in America. This just kind of like brings up a lot of things like under Keynesianism, 35% of workers were unionized. This is the highest of all time in American history. The marginal tax rate hovered around 90% between the 1940s and the 1950s, which we experienced the highest rates of growth that we've ever experienced in a country. The meanies. Are we the baddies? The 1% market or GDP share or in at national income share was as low as it's been in modern history. What's up, Johnny?
I was just gonna do my best Bernie impression of the 1%.
There you go. Thank you. So now this is the time where we can introduce a break where Keynesianism starts to falter in public opinion as well. So now we can introduce the individuals such as Frederick Hayek and Milton Friedman. Did I say that right? Hayek? Is that how you say it?
Hayek? I don't know. I think he's Austrian. And then there's Milton Friedman, who's from fucking New Jersey. No, I'm not proud of that at all. I wish we could take that back.
Thank you.
That's New Jersey's biggest L is Milton Friedman.
We apologize collectively for New Jersey.
It says right here, Friedman was an American economist born to immigrant parents from Eastern Europe who ran a textile sweatshop in New Jersey. Right? Who cares if he was born in Chicago? I don't care. The point is, like, if you're raised here, you're from here. All right. The same way, like, Hassan Abi or Piker or whatever tries to act like he's not from New Jersey. He's like, bro, nah, I see you, bro. You're
tinged
fucking
with
New Jersey.
Smell it. I can smell the New Jersey. on
Yeah,
you.
I could smell it. You try to act like, you're a fucking California native or some bullshit. Nah, bro.
Yeah.
No shot.
So, now we have this, just like Wolf Skeptic was saying, this University of Chicago, the Mont Pelerin Society, this birth of libertarian ideology, but I think it's more accurately referred to as
Anarcho-capitalism?
No, neoliberalism. Because like I think that if you are actually like a stark component of a stark adherent to libertarianism, then you would have to also denounce government intervention to aid markets. And that's kind of like the fundamental difference between laissez-faire capitalism and neoliberalism. Because laissez-faire capitalism means that like the government should just take a complete step back and let the chips fall where they may. Neoliberal capitalism refers to that a government should take an active role in supporting markets flourishing. So I think like a good example of this would kind of be like the current insurance situation that we exist under, where like we're almost federally encouraged in a very extreme way to engage with private insurance providers. Important and fine distinctions, yes.
Look, let's just.
But you understand what I'm getting at here, right?
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at, but it's funny because like literally this chapter starts off with him describing exactly why this doesn't fucking work.
Well,
and
exactly.
I'm gonna quote it. The easiest way to decrease the cost of production, of course, is to push down workers' wages. But if this process is left unchecked, eventually wages get so low that workers cannot afford to buy the products they produce. Demand goes down, and the market becomes glutted with excess goods with no one to buy them. Goods quickly lose their value, businesses stop producing, and the economy slows down. This is what happens when capitalism is left to its own devices. It generates such an extreme inequality that the whole system simply seizes up. And then you have shit like Bitcoin and NFTs and other kinds of grifting fucking bullshit.
Yeah. Exactly. So now that we kind of understand like this kind of like advent of like neoliberal theory, exactly. And that's like the hallmark of a healthy economy, Wolf Skeptic, is if you have a prosperous working class, then a prosperous working class translates to consumerism. This is like the lubrication of a well-functioning economy, is like, money is moving around. It is not like centralized in the top 1% or whatever amount of earners that are just going to put it into offshore accounts, put it into accounts where they don't necessarily need to spend it. The thing is, when the working class is prosperous, they need to spend the money. They spend the money on products and goods and consumers. And there's probably a lot of things that you could do to say, like, if we wanted to look into a more like Marxist sense, but like just in terms of like what we can observe in the past century of capitalism, that like, within a capitalist structure, that this is like the most healthy way that you can do it. Not saying that I'm advocating for it. And there might be some way that this like level of consumerism isn't necessarily conducive to like a socialist government or a communist, influenced government. But regardless, just for the way that we're looking in terms of this discussion, which is very broad, like macro level for the United States, and then the third world countries that look to emulate it, this is a much more competent way of managing an economy. So if you want to learn how not to do that, we're going to talk about Chile. Well, it seems clearly came home with the OPEC oil crisis over culminating in the monetarianism in the 1980s, as old Lenin pointed out, they were no longer disposed to buy up the core working class. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Monsieur Balls. Like I've seen you in the chat. Like this is the first time I read your name. That's awesome. But so we're going to look at the Chile experiment, which is a critical and monumental example of how not to operate an economy. So we've talked about Chile several times on this podcast already. It's like impossible to talk about like all of these issues without The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. I have that book. I haven't read the whole thing, but yes, The Shock Doctrine has a good chapter about the freedmen and economic advice. I have to read that book. That has to be on our list of one of the books that we read because I haven't read it yet. It's kind of big. It's going to take us a while, but I've heard so much praise for that book. I have it on my shelf. I just haven't got to reading it yet. But shout out to Wolf Skeptic. Naomi Klein, Shock Doctrine is like essential leftist economic reading for sure. And I say that as I haven't read it. I'm sorry. I feel like a dickhead, but I just know it comes very, very highly recommended. So Chile.
I just want to state that like it's important to remember that like Salvador Allende, right? No revolution, no violent overthrow of like the former government or anything. No, like he was literally like Chilean Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, he was an admitted Marxist. He admitted that he was a Marxist.
But like a classical Marxist, because he thought that like, you know, you had to like still build up productive forces through like, you know, having like a market economy, and then
Arbenz was very similar to this as well. There's a lot of like things that like say that like Arbenz wasn't a communist, but if you like listen to testimonies from his wife, she actually stated that he had the Communist Manifesto, that he was very inspired by Marx, Lenin, places like that, people like that. He was very, very friendly with communists. He just wasn't a radical revolutionary in that sense. Like, you know, he was looking to go through. It was actually the plunder of Guatemala that inspired Cuba to be less conciliatory with its capitalist elements within its country. Yeah, Arbenz. If you read Shattered Hope, there are specific chapters in which his wife states about how he kept a communist manifesto on his bedside table, and that he was Shattered Hope. I'm sorry, this one I've held here. Look, I'll actually read you because I have.
Oh, Piero GladeJesus.
Yeah. I actually have something here that I can actually read to you about that. So,
and if you ever read anything by Piero, just know that like this thing's gonna have like citations coming out of the nose. Like the guy uses not just like citations from like, let's say, the Soviet or like, you know, the Cuban government, but he'll also use like, you know, sources from like the US. Like, I don't know how the fuck he does it, but he's able to get his hands on like CIA files in order to back his shit up. So it's always like, you know, the closest Piero. It's always like the closest approximation to the truth that like you're going to get.
Right. So just to read this real quick. After receiving a copy of the Communist Manifesto at a women's Congress meeting, Maria, his wife, would leave the book on Jacobo's bedside table before leaving for a brief vacation. The manifesto would inspire the young officer, stimulating his taste for history, economics, and philosophy. Increasingly, his reading included Marxist writings, among them works by Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. In an interview with Piero Gladesis, Maria would recall Marxist theory offered Jacobo an explanation for explanations that weren't available in other theories. What other theory can one use to analyze our country's past? Marx is not perfect, but he comes closest to explaining the history of our country. And then he went on to appoint many communists into his government. He was very supportive of communist labor unions. And then even after he was disposed, he went and took a position in Cuba. So, I mean, like, you know, with Fidel, it didn't really last very long. He felt like he was kind of like being made a fool because he was constantly pointed at how not to do things. Yes. Yeah. Arbenz went to Cuba.
I thought when Castro came to Chile, all I know is that like at some point Fidel Castro gifted him an AK-47. And you
after
know,
the Cuban Revolution of 1959, a representative Fidel Castro government asked Arbenz to come to Cuba, to which he readily agreed. Sensing an opportunity to live with fewer restrictions on himself, he flew to Havana in July 1960 and, caught up in the spirit of the recent revolution, began to participate in public events.
Here's a link for like a documentary about Project Cybersyn and like, you know, the full CIA coup in Chile. But all I remember is from that documentary, allegedly what happened was
we're talking about like two different things. It's a little. just
What do you
joined
mean?
but yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead, finish. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything.
That, like, Fidel, literally like handed him an AK-47, was like telling him like they're never gonna let you continue to govern. Allende literally up until the end sincerely thought that, like, I haven't overthrown any government. I won a popular election. I keep winning, right? Like, I understand, like, they're definitely, like, bankrolling my opposition and stuff, but I'm incredibly popular. I don't see what I have to worry about. I haven't done anything illegal. And Fidel's like, you don't have to, man.
Yeah. So back to the topic of Chile, and I just pulled it up real quick. That and not only that, he also apparently attended a communist congress in Helsinki, also in 1965. So I believe he was very modest. I don't think he was very outright in being like, I'm a full blown fucking communist, but I believe he did believe that there was going to be like a progressive and not necessarily like outright revolutionary, but like with land reform and things like that, that he could transition Guatemala into like a socialistic country. But so just returning to what we were talking about in Chile, sorry to get sidetracked as we so routinely do. Salvatore Allende, as we just talked about, becomes an avowed Marxist, becomes, though a modest one, a very moderate political individual, not like looking to maraud through the countryside with like Bolsheviks, liquidating a kulak class or whatever else you want to say that and try to paint him as or anything like that. Or
He wasn't an authoritarian.
Yeah. So because that he did praise Stalin when he died. So Wolf Skeptic, what he did was he had a moment of silence for Stalin when he passed away, and that was one of the things that was like routinely paraded around by like the anti-communists in the United States, or like a way to vilify him is that like, oh, he did a moment of silence or a remembrance for Stalin when he passed away. And I believe that Jacobo Arbenz's response to that was that as far as I knew, he was an ally in World War II. We looked at them as heroes. You know what I mean? We looked at not only Stalin, but also the other powers that helped to overthrow Hitler. So we've always revered Stalin along with them as the hero of World War II that helped defeat Nazism. So I believe that was his response to that.
You'll find a lot of people that, like, especially in the global South, did not follow the line after the Khrushchev speech, right? That denounced Stalin and all of these other things and accused him of all of these like things, right? A lot of people in the global South, what is it? Allende had supported the Communist Party, which is aligned with the CPSU. Well, Castro refused entry to the Spanish anarchists who applied for visas living under Franco. Well, that would be interesting to look into and understand why.
There is something here says Castro turned his back on the anti-Francoists. I mean, also Castro had a hand in like UMAP camps that existed for 4 years. I mean, Castro is not like a perfect fucking guy, and he's also not the amalgamation of the entire Cuban Revolution, or like the state of Cuba as it's existed since the revolution. So I mean, like, I think there's plenty of criticisms that can be levied at Fidel Castro. I think Fidel Castro even levied criticisms of himself at certain times. So I mean, like,
especially near the end of his life, and he did not.
I'm not here to dispel every negative claim against him or anything. I don't even actually think that we were necessarily praising him as much as we were just saying that he allowed Arbenz to come there and also gave some strategic advice to Salvador Allende.
Yeah, and I think that like a lot of what Castro did.
Was that also kind of, didn't that have something to do with the Sino-Soviet split as well? That like, I think like after that Khrushchev situation, when China was like kind of like being less cool with the Soviet Union, it had to kind of do with that turn after Khrushchev's speech. Well, those anarchists who had not become a part of the Franco regime, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'm actually not a expert on the Spanish Civil War situation. I could definitely stand to read more regarding that situation. So any suggestions of sources or anything like that are welcome. I appreciate your contributions. But yeah, definitely was a turning point during that speech after the death of Stalin. Cuba doesn't have any statues or monuments of Castro. Yeah.
Friends,
Yeah,
brief interruption from your friendly neighborhood voice of God. How much longer do we think we're gonna go? And I'm only asking because we've been streaming for about 2.5 hours now, and I just want to make sure everybody's drinking water, see if anybody needs to use the bathroom, maybe
I actually
eat some
ran away.
dinner.
I ran away. I actually am going to have to order dinner soon because restaurants are going to start closing and I have to order food. But
yeah, I don't want to rush you or make you feel like you have to cut off, but I just want to make sure that we're taking care of our bodies and our minds.
Because I have work tomorrow and I actually have a couple assignments that I need to submit for school that I've already finished, but I have to like finalize them and submit them and everything. So I got a couple things I need to do. But
all right.
Okay.
So I will, as your producer and stage manager, check back in with you at 8:50 and remind you that you've got 10 minutes left.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
So, I mean, what we could do. All right. How do you want to end this with?
Well, I guess the two options would be I could run through my notes that I have and kind of create like a spark note of like kind of like the conclusion of this chapter, or
Thank you, Willie.
Or we could just kind of bullshit. It's up to you. I don't care.
Love you, Will. Let's see here. Well, I mean, I also have the entire last speech of Allende's like final words.
I have the whole thing right here.
Yeah, so I mean, like, it's up to you if you want to like, play those two videos.
I kind of don't want to like just do like a bunch of videos to end it out. Like, I kind of want to just make sure that we like cover and like put a cap on the chapter so that next week or in a couple days when we revisit it, we're there. Do you agree with that? Or?
Dude, run through your notes, right? And then like let me like, I guess, like bullshit for like a minute while you go order food, and then we'll end it with Allende's final words.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So just to talk about Chile. So in 1956, Chile, the U.S. government launched something called Project Chile, which brought 100 Chilean econ students to the University of Chicago, which would become known as the Chicago Boys. They would be educated in the style of economics that was created by Milton Friedman, and this type of neoliberal drive towards economic theory. Despite millions being dumped into this neoliberal economic ideology through things like the University of Chicago, state-led development processes were still extremely popular throughout Latin America. Things like nationalization, things like land reform, and other types of like international cooperation that aided more internal development of these nations. When Salvador Allende gets elected in Chile, he establishes a minimum wage that didn't exist. He reduced food prices. He created free school meal programs. He expanded low-income housing. He extended public transit. He nationalized the copper mines. I believe Chile has the largest copper mines in all of the Western Hemisphere. They were owned by, I believe, a company called Anaconda. If you ever watch the movie or read the book, Motorcycle Diaries, by Che Guevara, this is one of the things that he sees that he becomes very, very angry with, and some of the things that had a radicalizing effect on him. He capped land ownership at 80 hectares. He compensated the private owners, so he didn't even just we're going to get to that. Hold on, I'm skeptic. We're going to get to that. 80 hectares. He compensated the private owners, so he didn't even nationalize it without compensation. He did pay the owners. And then
which is the thing Marx brings up.
Yeah. He ended the latifundia and redistributed land to peasant farmers. Results. So how did this work? Did the economy fall to shambles? No. Wages rose, poverty declined, school enrollment reached record levels for the nation of Chile, and it threatened the consolidation of U.S. corporate power in Chile. This is what, if you know this alarmed the corporate interests of the United States, which in turns alarmed the political structure of the United States. And this is what prompted the famous, do you know the famous quote by Richard Nixon about Chile? What he said?
Yeah.
What did he say?
He said, it's time to make the economy scream.
That is exactly the quote that I was talking about. So Nixon made an outright call to make the Chilean economy scream, meaning that internally the Chilean economy was doing just fine, but we need to artificially hamper the economy so that civilians suffer. There's a great document about Cuba, about how Castro is too popular. We have to immiserate the civilians of Cuba before they'll be willing to overthrow him. So like there's a very explicit one about Cuba. This is that same vein, but less explicit in terms of how they're referring to Salvador Allende's Chile. This is what prompts the coup against Salvador Allende, which we've actually talked about in private in past streams. Yeah. I don't want to go over it again, but the CIA prompted and funded a coup, in which I think British planes literally flew over Santiago and dropped bombs.
They were British made.
Okay, I'm sorry. Dropped bombs on the city hall. Allende killed himself. Thousands and thousands of people were arrested, tortured, and exterminated in makeshift prisons, such as the one that was put into the National Football Stadium. And from that point, Pinochet came to power and went on a further campaign of leftist persecution. No, he didn't. So, and then this is like an interesting thing, because this is actually kind of a interesting turn in the process of the CIA, because prior to Chile, I think the CIA was a little bit more interested in as long as they could impose someone that is an anti-communist and then allow that person to just kind of like put forth whatever, anti-communist and favorable business interest environment. But this is the first time where the CIA actually made a, I have a quote right here from actually a CIA file, that CIA was actually going to have a hand in economic planning of a country.
Right. Yeah. This is the first time that they're going to bring in like the Chicago boys. I know we've not mentioned them up until now, but
this is actually a CIA file. Go ahead.
The part of like the CIA's plan long before the coup, or at least an initial part of the coup, right, was to try and foster like this internal movement by, I think it was like 100 different like young like college students in Chile, and bringing them like to the University of Chicago, one of those universities, and pretty much like teaching them to be little Milton Friedmans, little Chilean Milton Friedmans, which is like the most demonic, monstrous thing I could possibly fucking imagine. And it didn't take. It didn't take. There was no traction. No. Like everyone was like, "What are you talking about? This is like the greatest our economy has like ever been. Why shut the fuck up?" Yeah. So, yeah, and then like I think there was that other guy. What's his name? Like Volkner or something. He comes in later. Okay. But like.
So just this little summarization here. The goal of covert action immediately following the coup was to assist the junta in gaining a more positive image, both at home and abroad, and to maintain access to the command level of the Chilean government. Another goal, achieved in part through work done at the opposition research organization before the coup, was to help the new government organize and implement new policies. Project files recorded that CIA collaborators were involved in preparing the initial overall economic plan, which has served as the basis for the junta's most important economic decisions. And just to go back to our inventing reality type of discussion, with regard to the continuing propaganda project, a number of activities, including production of books, a mailing effort, military collection program, and the media coordination effect, were terminated, just to consolidate media. So talks a little bit about the CIA actually having a outright plan of economic planning in Chile following the coup. The Chicago boys, who we discussed earlier, which were the 100 Chilean econ students that were brought to the University of Chicago to learn under the tutelage of Milton Friedman. Friedman himself was actually a key advisor to Pinochet. Friedman's experiment in Chile was a disaster. Hyperinflation set in immediately following the coup, soaring to 341% of the pre-coup rate. Unemployment soared. Under Allende, unemployment was 3%. Under Pinochet, it soared to 19%. Pinochet privatized 500 state companies, sold off public schools and Social Security, cost of living soared, and The Economist, even The Economist, like, a mainstream publication, said that it was an orgy of self-mutilation, referring to the privatization of the Chilean economy. In
The
1982,
not
The
the
Economist.
nation.
Yeah, The Economist said that, yeah. In 1982, the economy crashed again. Hyperinflation set in again. Unemployment went up to 35%. And in that time, Pinochet actually fired many of the Chicago boys and renationalized many of the private companies and banks. Like Wolf Skeptic said, the Codelco copper mine accounted for 85% of national revenue. It remained nationalized the whole time. That's how important the nationalized mining industry was during all this fucking bullshit about the neoliberal, the market. They still needed these copper mines for 85% of their income. Yes, exactly.
The poverty rate was 41%. Average wages were 14% lower. The minimum wage was 42% lower, and hunger was widespread, with the food intake of the poorest 40% of the population having plunged from 2,000 calories per day to 1,600. Even as late as 1993, GDP per capita was 12% below its pre-coup level. That's what 30 years later, 33 years later, right? The only people
with unequal societies in the world,
right? It's pre-coup level. The only people that benefited from the new economic regime were the elite. Banks and foreign investors were having a field day, liberated as they were from regulation, and the incomes of the richest 10% soaring, with their share of the national pie up by 28%. Chile had become one of the most unequal societies in the world.
Yep. Well, Chile did have a minimum wage law. Apparently, under Allende, he implemented the first one, and then I believe that was done away with. Just to run through this all, and that's kind of like the story, the very unfortunate story of Chile, which could have been an amazing story of a Marxist-inspired, popularly elected president taking a self-determinant process of his nation's economy, and instead it turned into a horrid tale of anti-democracy, murder, imprisonment, and then just economic mishap that probably caused many, many millions of people to suffer.
I think it's even more amazing than that. And that's why I posted the plastic pills video about Project Cybersyn in the chat. It's really long, so we're not going to watch it on stream. But I think that when you think about a modern economy, or the way a modern industry like Amazon or Walmart or any of these other companies function, right? They have computer systems where everything is constantly in sync, right? And it's economy, right? I'm trying to find the easiest way to explain it, right? But it's been a while since I last read anything or watched anything about it. Should have in preparation, and I kind of wish he went a little bit into this, but the way that Project Cybersyn would have modernized a socialist economy is nothing that we would see probably for another 40 to 50 years. Right, not until the 20, late into the early aughts, right, of the 2000s, right, would we see anything like a socialist economy with the kind of technology behind it. Good point on the hyperinflation in Chile. This is a free market shill, always peddled as the antidote to inflation. But that's the thing, is it is nothing but just snake oil. Any problem, any issue is because it's impure. It's not real capitalism. It's crony capitalism. And it's read, just literally look up fucking Bikram Gill on like Twitter for like half an hour, and you'll see that like anything related to like political economy will prove to you that like that's capitalism. That's not impure capitalism.
I just linked a book. It's called Cybernetic Revolutionaries. It's actually about Chile's, I forget what you referred to. I don't know the actual name of it, but it was Chile's experiment with peaceful socialist change, and then like building a computer system that would manage Chile's economy. Which, like, this happened in the early 1970s, 1971, right?
For like less than 3 years.
The internet,
even.
you know what I mean? Like it was such
Exactly.
a forward-thinking process that it's almost like, yes, capitalism.
Like the Soviets weren't doing anything like this. The Chinese weren't doing anything like
Third
this.
world country. A third world country was doing this.
Like, imagine if that was allowed to
I
prosper.
don't know if you know about this, but I think it's on the hold on. I think it's actually in the Wikipedia page that like during the coup, like they actually like smashed everything. Yeah. After the look, I just wanted to show this too, because this is like the saddest, like it's like such like a cave. After the military coup of September 11, 1973, Cybersyn was abandoned and the operation room was destroyed. Like, I just like, or not that I like it, but I find it humorous, this idea of this like coup going on, and then these like cavemen just come into the computer room with like bats, and they're like, none of this.
I mean, that's Rosa Luxemburg's, phrase in
Barbarity.
the truest sense. Yeah,
Socialism and barbarism.
It really is barbarism.
Yeah.
It's absolute fucking primitive, fucking just monstrous barbarity. Like, he was creating something that could have advanced like the rest of the known goddamn world in fucking Chile of all places.
And if you read the book, what's it called? It's called The People's Republic of Walmart, where it talks about like how like kind of like Walmart is such a huge economy that, and it's like kind of like a tech, like kind of like centrally planned to some degree. I read the book before. I'm sorry, I don't actually know it, super fluently, but like, this, computers are like the burgeoning, landscape of like economics at this point. And then it gets crazy to think like how forward thinking that Allende was in the early 70s to be proposing such a thing and actually putting it into plan. I think Paul Cockshott in the book Towards a New Socialism refers to it, and also has like a more contemporary analysis of how that would look today.
The capitalism's propensity to kill itself is insurmountable, it seems. It doesn't kill itself. Capitalism is able to survive anything. Capitalism is literally the thing, from the movie The Thing, right? It will mimic anything. It will take in any environment and it will survive, right? And like, even the flame, no matter how frightened it is of it, no matter how much the flame of socialism harms it, right, it's not enough to completely kill it and destroy it.
Yeah, agreed. So that's really like the only note I have left is just like a couple things that like were like how it came home. Neoliberalism comes home is the name of the chapter. Keynesianism faltered. The Vietnam War expanded. Money was printed recklessly by Nixon, and OPEC raised the price of oil, causing a lot of strain on the domestic economy of the United States. The war and oil becoming more expensive, and then Nixon just printing money like it doesn't exist. Then that's kind of what set the stage for Reagan to step in with his trickle-down concept. He cuts marginal tax from 70% to 28%. He reduced capital gains tax to 20%. He raised payroll taxes on the working class, deregulated finance, and abolished Glass-Steagall. CEO salaries rose by 400% during the 1990s, while workers grew less than 5%. U.S. minimum wage decreased by over 9%.
Imperialism or liberal state, all of this, it's the same thing. It's arms, legs, and digits of the same body. It's the same organism. It's not a separate thing, right? It's like when people say that like, oh, fascism is capitalism in decay. It's still capitalism. It's just capitalism showing its teeth. It doesn't it doesn't become a new thing. It's not like it's gone super. It's not like it's gone Super Saiyan or something. It's like the same shit. It's the same person.
Here, I brought this up for you.
So yeah,
this was the sign off for our spiritual advisor Salvador Allende, and it will also be the sign off for this episode. Do you call streams episodes or this installment?
Yeah,
of,
this is going to be an episode. So like, there's one last thing before you hit play on that, and there's like a lot of like revolutionary figures like Kwame Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral. There's a lot of stuff. There's even a lot of like YouTube videos that like we really didn't get the chance to like bring up, and this is just good peripheral information to help make it easier, right? So and also at some point I do want to share a PDF of it on our Discord, and as we keep doing more books and more episodes, I definitely want to have like the emotes, right, be kind of democratized. If you guys want to like throw in emotes that you want to see in our chat, right, throw them in the Discord. We'll throw them up there. But like there's a lot of stuff that like we weren't able to share or use today that like I'll put in the Discord later tonight. But I think that like if you see me cry, don't judge me, because like I can't help it every time I hear this. It's for me like one of the most moving things, because he was such a gentle, charismatic man that wanted nothing but the best for his people, and did it through the most peaceful means and didn't do anything wrong. In like the eyes of the world, the only thing he tried to do was to make a better country for his people in the most sincere way you could at that time. And I can't help but think of like him reflecting in the moment where he's giving this and left with nothing more but that AK-47 that allegedly Fidel Castro gave him. And I can't imagine the heartache that Fidel felt knowing what had happened to somebody that he probably considered a friend, a comrade, that really believed that he did everything right. It's a shame. It's a shame that the world was robbed of a country on the path that Chile was.
La última oportunidad en que me pueda dirigir a ustedes. La Fuerza Aérea ha bombardeado las torres de Radio Portales y Radio Corporación. Mis palabras no tienen amargura sino decepción, y serán ellas el castigo moral para los que han traicionado el juramento de Chile. Soldados de Chile, comandantes en jefe, titulares, el almirante Merino, que se ha autodesignado, más el señor Mendoza, general rastrero, que solo ayer manifestara su fidelidad y lealtad al gobierno, también será nominado director general del Carabineros. Ante estos hechos, solo me cabe decirle a los trabajadores: yo no voy a renunciar. Colocado en un tránsito histórico, pagaré con mi vida la lealtad del pueblo. Y les digo que tengo la certeza que la semilla que entregáramos a la conciencia digna de miles y miles de chilenos no podrá ser cegada definitivamente. Tienen la fuerza, podrán avasallarnos, pero no se detienen los procesos sociales, ni con el crimen, ni con la fuerza. La historia es nuestra y la hacen los pueblos. Trabajadores de mi patria, quiero agradecerles la lealtad que siempre tuvieron, la confianza que depositaron en un hombre que solo fue intérprete de grandes anhelos de justicia, que empeñó su palabra y que respetaría la Constitución y la ley, y así lo hizo. En este momento definitivo, el último en que yo pueda dirigirme a ustedes, pero que aprovechen la lección. El capital foráneo, el imperialismo, unido a la reacción, creó el clima para que las Fuerzas Armadas rompieran su tradición, la que le enseñara Schneider y que regimara el comandante Araya. Víctimas del mismo sector social que hoy estará en sus casas esperando con mano ajena reconquistar el poder para seguir defendiendo sus granjerías y sus privilegios. Me dirijo sobre todo a la modesta mujer de nuestra tierra, a la campesina que creyó en nosotros, a la obrera que trabajó más, a la madre que supo nuestra preocupación por los niños. Me dirijo a los profesionales de la patria, a los profesionales patriotas, a los que hace días estuvieron trabajando contra la sedición auspiciada por los colegios profesionales, colegios de clase, para defender también las ventajas de una sociedad capitalista de unos pocos. Me dirijo a la juventud, aquellos que cantaron, entregaron su alegría y su espíritu de lucha. Me dirijo al hombre de Chile, al obrero, al campesino, al intelectual, aquellos que serán perseguidos, porque en nuestro país el fascismo ya estuvo hace muchas horas presente en los atentados terroristas, volando los puentes, cortando la línea férrea, destruyendo los oleoductos y los gasoductos, frente al silencio de los que tenían la obligación de proteger. La historia lo juzgará. Seguramente Radio Magallanes será callada y el metal tranquilo de mi voz no llegará a ustedes, no importa. Lo seguirán oyendo. Siempre estaré junto a ustedes. Por lo menos mi recuerdo tendrá el nombre digno que fue leal a la lealtad. El pueblo debe defender, pero no sacrificar. El pueblo no debe dejarse arrasar ni acribillar, pero tampoco puede humillar. Trabajadores de mi patria, tengo fe en Chile y su destino. Superará otros hombres este momento gris y amargo donde la traición pretende imponer. Sigan ustedes sabiendo que mucho más temprano que tarde, de nuevo, abrirán las grandes alamedas por donde pase el hombre libre para construir una sociedad mejor. ¡Viva Chile! ¡Viva el pueblo! ¡Vivan los trabajadores! Estas fueron mis últimas palabras. Tengo la certeza de que mi sacrificio no será en vano. Tengo la certeza de que por lo menos será una lección moral que castigará la felonía, la cobardía y la traición.
Fuck.
That before, but I've never actually heard it. I've actually read that before, but I've never actually heard it narrated like that. And just like over the picture of him, you can actually hear the bombs going off in the background, and his voice doesn't tremble once.
No,
like he said, the dignified. You will remember me as a dignified man, and you will. This is the last time you'll hear my voice, but you will continue hearing it, and that is evident right now because right now we're playing it. 50 years later, there's still people like that are taking this speech from this man and putting it in front of us and being like, look at this as an example. You know what I mean? And right now we might be like a small stream of us 3 and 12 people in here. You know what I mean? But like the fact of the matter is that he was not wrong and his legacy was not, there's plenty of people that try to lead noble programs for their people, but when they're met with this kind of like resistance, they acquiesce the levers to whoever because it's convenient. It might be profitable for them or anything like that. But he said, I will not resign. It's like Che Guevara when he stood and he said, shoot, you fucking coward. You're just killing a man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, essentially called like the CIA op that was about to put a bullet in his head a bitch or, a coward. I don't want to use any incorrect. I'm sorry.
And it's
absolutely inspiring.
It like after reading this, and I tried to find like as many videos as I could, and I know we didn't really get to do as many as I found, but like when you learn about like what happened to like Antonio Agostino Neto, right, or Amilcar Cabral, Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba is the most fucking heartbreaking because there's like actual footage of him being taken away in like the back of the fucking truck. It's just like, Jesus Christ.
Thomas Sankara, even
Thomas Sankara, fucking
Gaddafi, you know what I mean? Like Gaddafi was pretty much like raped with a bayonet. I'm actually not being hyperbolic when I
I remember watching the video before I knew anything about him, and I remember like him saying like, you don't know what you're doing. Right. And now that like especially since like reading Stalin about how like like after I die they'll drown you like a bag of kittens, right, in the river. Like, you don't understand, right? And I think that like especially after Allende, especially after Indonesia, especially after Guatemala, especially after all this, like it really doesn't matter how close to the letter you play by the rules, it domestically, internationally, right? If you fuck around and you fuck with the money, you're on the table and you will be killed.
And that's why Castro. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, look at Martin Luther King, look at Malcolm X, look at Fred Hampton, look at like a majority of like the Black Panthers, look at where fucking Assata Shakur still is today. Look at like what happened to most of the AIM movement. Look at what happened to Richard Oak. Look at what happened to like anybody that tries to mimic anything like what these people do and like make life better for the majority of the people. You get got.
Yeah. So I think, that's a good time for us to break off here. This is the longest stream that we've ever done. I have to order food before these restaurants start closing.
I thought you were already ordering.
No, I haven't done anything.
All right.
And I have to do these I have to finish up these couple of school assignments. And I think that that sign off was what we needed. So appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Please subscribe if you can, right? We don't have any kind of like goal yet, that'll be something that like we're going to do later. That's why North Korea is the way it is. They understand. They absolutely fucking do, and I won't hear otherwise. Thank you, Frank. So like, please subscribe, tell your friends, join the Discord. We have the link listed right below. I'm sorry if you're using mobile, right? When you can later, I guess, like, find our
you can just type exclamation point.
Oh, I can do that? Just exclamation point Discord?
Yes.
Wait.
It won't work because I just did it, but
well,
it's on like a 60-second cooldown, but
thank you, Lily. So, yeah, we have a Discord, we need people, like we want to like make this as democratic a process as possible, and we definitely want your input. This is a lot less authoritarian than other, Twitch streams. We really do want your input, and we really do want you to be like, active and participating, with us in this little book club. We love you so much. Thank you everyone that subscribed today. Thank you, Sam. Thank you. What the hell was it? Like littlest,
tiniest boops.
Tiniest boop. Thank you for subscribing. And thank you everyone that has helped make this possible. Lal Salam. Stay strong.
We'll be back on Wednesday.
We'll be back on Wednesday, 6:00. Wait, Wednesday isn't Thanksgiving, is it?
No, that's
okay.
Thursday.
Good. All right, yeah, we'll see you Wednesday, 6:00.
Bye, everybody.